Regent McMillan, you can proceed. We are live.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. Good morning to my fellow regents, members of the administration, members of the public, and our student representatives. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents Finance and Operations Committee. And let's see, open with a couple of remarks. One, I was not one of the 26 ice fishermen rescued from an ice floe in Lake Superior yesterday, so don't anybody, or the day before. Some of you may have thought that, including you, Vice Chair Swigum. It was not me. I was watching them, but I was not one of them. Two, we are not scheduled to meet in March, although oftentimes the business of this committee warrants special meetings, and three of our colleagues on this committee are not seeking re-election. And in the event we don't meet again as a committee, I would like to just take a quick moment to recognize the service of Randy, Tom, and Rick. And I want to call out Rick in particular, serving as vice chair of this committee for the past 2 years. He's been a rock for me, not only on this committee, but all the way back to my first being given assignments in leadership roles by Regent Beeson when he was chair of the board many years ago. So always a good head to turn to, but all three of you have been constructive and very, very helpful and thoughtful in your feedback to me as we've conducted the business of this committee, and you will all be missed. So with that, do we have both student representatives here, Jason? I think Rodrigo Tojo Garcia is here, and I don't know about Paul Koak.
Not yet, Chair McMillan. We're working on it.
Well, welcome, Rodrigo. And then let me turn now to the first item of business. We have one item of business on the main agenda for action. That's the first item, system-wide strategic plan implementation and the system-wide campus master planning principles, which I'll introduce in a moment. Then we have a range of critical but non-action items. And then in the consent report, we have several action items as well. So that's the order of business before us today. And our first item is the principles that will be used to guide system-wide campus master plannings across the campuses in our state. We reviewed this in December, and I invite President Gabel, Vice President Bertelsen, Director McKenzie to provide any framing comments they may have before we discuss and act on the resolution. So let's start with you, President Gabel. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair McMillan. And please allow me just a moment to add my thanks and appreciation to Anderson, Beeson, and Simonson as well, who have been angels on my shoulder as I transitioned into this role and are a huge part of why we're able to be here today discussing the strategic plan and the different aspects of our mission and innovation in the ways that we are, as thanks to their governance and guidance. So members of the committee, as part of MPAC 2025, we have committed to establishing long-term physical master plans for each campus so that we can be forward-thinking and good stewards for our communities and make sure that we are updated regularly to reflect our service and opportunities. The Twin Systems campus has initiated steps to be the first system campus to fulfill this component of the strategic plan. It won't be the last. And campus leaders are currently working with the outside firm Sasaki, which was selected as a result of a competitive bid process in May. The planning aims to update the 2009 master plan with a focus on building a campus as opposed to individual facilities. And this important work addresses a range of themes from institutional strategy, sustainability, academic activity. Obviously, our timing is inadvertently excellent in allowing us to address the possibility of what the new educational post-pandemic experience might be like and how our master plan can reflect that as well. It's an integrated planning focus, and it should reflect not only the strategic plan commitment in to master planning itself, but the overall strategic plan, how the strategic plan reveals itself in our physical infrastructure. So joining me today are Vice President Mike Bertelsen and Director of Campus and Capital Planning Monique McKenzie, who will present a revised set of system-wide campus master planning principles. These were first adopted in 1993 So this will be for your action, and it will direct the upcoming updates of each campus master plan as it comes before you. So before turning it over to them, I want to thank all of those who have engaged and will engage in this critical process. It's a really collaborative effort to shape a bold, strategic, long-term vision for the campus that really enhances us and positions us to be able to act upon possibility, and it ensures that our best days lie ahead. So with that, I'll thank you, Mr. Chair, and turn it back to you.
President Gable, we appreciate excellence, even if it's inadvertent, so that's good. We'll go to Vice President Bertelsen and Director McKenzie at your leisure, or at your pleasure here.
Good morning, Chair McMillan and Regents. Thank you. And with the President's great introduction, this should go very quickly. So let's jump to the next slide, please. As a reminder, as the President said, updating master plans for each campus is part of Commitment 5 in the system-wide strategic plan. Next slide. These recommended principles are on pages 6 and 7 of your docket as part of the resolution and are unchanged from what we presented to you in December. And that's our presentation. We're glad to take any questions.
Well, that was fast.
Chair McMillan, I would move the principles if that's helpful.
That is most helpful, Regent Powell. Thank you. I was going to ask for a motion, but now I don't need to. Is there a second so we can open this up for discussion and eventual action?
Second.
Very good. Lots of seconds there. Thank you. Let's see here. You know the drill, everybody. Either I'll try and watch the raised hands or get a hold of Jason. I'm going to open my screen up here to see if I see any more hand raisers. Mr. Langworthy, anybody that wants to visit about this or raise questions?
Not that I see, Chair McMillan.
Well, we did have a robust discussion in December. I'll give it another minute and then we will ask you to call the roll. No raised hands appearing. Let's proceed to move to a vote. Mr. Langworthy.
Chair McMillan, on the motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to the system-wide campus master planning principles, Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes. Chair McMillan, there are 12 yes votes, no votes.
Very good. Thank you, members of the committee. That matter carries on a vote of 12-0 and is approved, which takes us to item 2, which is a subset of item 1. And this is for discussion, the Twin Cities campus master plan. And I'm guessing we have the same presenters and perhaps I think one more, maybe 2 with our outside consultants. So are we going to go back to Vice President Bertelsen, I believe, to lead this one in?
Yes, sir. Chair McMillan. Good morning. I'll wait for the presentation to come up. All right. Again, thank you, Chair McMillan and Regents. Today, we're building on the introduction of these topics at your December meeting to foster discussion about the future of our Twin Cities campus. You can see in your docket, starting on page 12, a more full description and a broad set of questions that we will be introducing both in this presentation and bringing back to you in smaller groups over the next month. I'm joined today by Monique McKenzie, Director of Campus Planning, and Greg Havens, Principal at Sasaki, our consultant partner for this effort. Next slide, please. For today's discussion, we want to provide some background to the visioning conversation. We'll begin with a reminder of our starting framework in the form of the system-wide strategic plan and some of the key trends both derived from our experience in this pandemic and other factors that have been relevant to the campus planning well before the COVID-19. For now, I'll ask Monique McKenzie to start us off with a guiding framework for the system-wide strategic plan. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mike. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So just a word here, Chair McMillan, members of the committee, about how we're approaching the development of our plan. We are grateful for the guidance really established even at the strategic commitment level to help us think about how we'll establish parameters for the future campus plan. We feel that these commitments are very rich, they're very broad, they will really bring us a tremendous influence in how we think about the future. We are going to frame this plan within a 10-year horizon, and we'll really take these broad direction established in our strategic plan to shape the physical plan. We believe this is a great opportunity for the physical plan for our Twin Cities campus to support the overall success of the institution. We're going to take these lenses and apply them to a sense of place, to the physical assets that comprise the 23 million square feet of buildings and the hundreds of acres that we find here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And really, we're going to apply these to the very idea of how our campus community uses those same assets and how our campus community feels about this place. Mike referenced earlier that the core questions that we've clustered under each of these commitments can be found in your docket on page 12 and 13. And so you might just keep those in mind. Greg will be leading us through this conversation. We'll be paying close attention to how you respond to some of those questions because it will really help us establish direction. So we're very grateful for this time with you today on visioning. Next slide, please. Another important tool for us in terms of building up this campus master plan, this future-looking, this fundamentally flexible campus plan that we need to build for ourselves given the times we're in, is to turn to tools we've established in the past, recognizing they captured a point of view and a moment in time that certainly has changed. This diagram is from the development framework that we worked on for the Twin Cities campus. I think some regents today on the board were present when we reviewed this with you in February of 2016. This diagram, or this framework as we call it on the left, really defined the basic functions on campus, whether they're academic, residential, and social for students and for members of the community, research concentrations and hubs, clinical activity, outreach, and identified the physical initiative. So what it is physically we need to think about to make sure we can enhance those fundamental activities that happen on our campus. We thought about activity, we thought about mobility, how we're getting around, how we value and use the open space here on campus, where future development could, should, maybe should not happen, and how we interact with neighborhoods and emerging areas that are near campus. Many of the significant trends that are influencing our campus, we talked about them at your December meeting, were well underway as we completed this work in 2016, but much has continued to evolve since then. So we think this is a good beginning, but we know the future will be guided particularly by current trends, future conditions, and the guidance that's there for us in the strategic plan. Next slide, please. The second tool for us as we begin this process of building up the future campus plan is looking to St. Paul and recent work that's been done on St. Paul. This is the most recent work, but it is by no means the only work that we've done thinking about the future of the St. Paul campus. We completed a strategic facilities plan in 2018 and reviewed some of the content with you, and know that this will be a fundamental building block for us as we go forward. The recommendations on the St. Paul plan touched a lot of the geography of the campus. I think you can see some of those buildings highlighted in pink. These recommendations were really built around a three-part vision. We wanted to make sure we would grow, place, specific activity unique to the St. Paul campus that's focused on interactions between managed land, natural ecosystems, and technology. And that's sort of a core identity piece for St. Paul. We also know the vision of the St. Paul campus really guided us to expand on the capacity to deliver outreach on the campus itself and around the state of Minnesota. We, of course, have a long history established in agricultural science and natural resource knowledge. That's really a core strength of ours for outreach. But there was a lot of discussion in that work, too, about lifelong learning, again, both on the campus and across the whole state. A third component of this vision for the work that we did in 2018 was the exciting potential to develop and support growth and research partnerships. So available resource, whether it's proximity to knowledge capital, whether it's facility equivalents, whether it's the possibility for shared work undertaken with partners, whether in industry or in other academic partnerships, was a very equally fundamental piece of the St. Paul vision. So when you think about this prior work we've done on both sites, the impact commitments that we showed you earlier are really, and are listed on the right of the slide, are really exciting because we believe there's a good crossover between the thinking we've done to date and how we will be guided in considering the future. So we're going to move into a more focused conversation now about trends and themes. With that, Chair McMillan, I'd like to turn it over to my counterpart, Greg Havens from Sasaki. He's been a terrific partner for the university in a number of efforts at Rochester about 4 or 5 years ago, and more recently here on the St. Paul campus as well. So with no further ado, next slide, please, and I'll introduce Greg.
Thank you, Monique, and good morning, everyone. As pointed out, I think this planning process is coming at a very important time in our history, obviously, with the post-COVID-19 opportunities that we're all looking forward to. In reviewing the literature out there and the discussions going on nationally, we've identified several themes or trends that are beginning to emerge in the national conversation, many of which are applicable, obviously, to the Twin Cities campuses. As we have identified and looked through these and worked with the university to have further discussion around each of them, there have been a few that are beginning to become really relevant in terms of the way we think about the future of your campus. We will explore these further as we move through the presentation, but some of the key things that I think we would highlight here are a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A move toward a more hybrid world, we could certainly see that. A need to think about student convenience and student engagement in new ways. All of those are beginning to form the conversation that we're having, and certainly we look forward to hearing more from you on some of these key issues that we're beginning to identify. On the next slide, we are also looking more broadly beyond just maybe what's coming out of the pandemic discussions. What are some of those trends and themes that we were seeing even prior to the current situation we're all in? And on the next slide, there are major heads of terms here of some of the things that were part of the discussion prior to the pandemic. Each of these represent a depth of conversation and a range of issues that are certainly going to remain important in this process. And through ongoing conversations and discussions with the university, we've started to narrow some of these down to be the key lenses through which we maybe will focus this planning effort. If we move to the next slide, those 5 themes that or lenses through which we'll begin to examine the Twin Cities campuses are as follows. One, we know that creating a more welcoming, inclusive campus environment will be important moving forward. So how do we create those opportunities to welcome more people, make a more inclusive environment, not only on West Bank, but East Bank and St. Paul? As noted, the hybrid or blended campus is likely to remain with us. So what aspects of this blended world will remain important? How might that transform student engagement and learning environments, even services that we do provide to students? So we need to think of that physical digital divide and how we move back and forth. That in turn leads to opportunities around space optimization. How do we think about space differently? Are there opportunities to use space more efficiently or differently moving forward? The next theme that we're starting to look at is innovation and outreach through the partnerships you're forming. Clearly, much of this is underway already, but as we look to the future, certainly at East Bank and in St. Paul, how do we foster more of the partnership opportunities that you seek to deliver as an institution? And what might be the opportunities with the surrounding community and the city as well? Sustainability remains critical as we think to the future, and especially over the next 10-year period. How do we make a more efficient environment, one that helps you achieve your goals around some of your own internal climate action planning? And that will remain part of this conversation. And then, of course, financial resiliency. How do we look for opportunities to use what you've already built more efficiently? And how do we help in this process set out a vision or a mindset for operating more efficiently moving forward? If we move to the next slide, we've provided on page 13 of your docket some starter questions around a conversation we'd like to have with you today. Now, we'll come back to these questions in a moment after we frame them a little more for this for the discussion today. But we're really looking to get a conversation going today around some of these key questions that align with the strategic commitments that have been set out for the university. If we move to the next slide, we'll start positioning some of this in the context of the development areas that Monique noted. We're looking to this as a foundational starting point for this process, some of the good work that's already taken place. How do we then take this work and align it with those strategic commitments we were just reviewing? If we consider each of these opportunities as shown here on the East and West Bank, the ideas of a partnership zone on the east side of campus, reinforcing or reinvesting in the core around student success and other opportunities, both on East and West Bank. Viewing the transit corridor as the connection for not only people, but of ideas and partnerships and research opportunities, not only on East and West Bank, but over to St. Paul as well. How do we engage the river, and how do we integrate campus and community edges in a way that are more meaningful and beneficial to the university and the community? If we move to the next slide, we'll start thinking about these in a little more detail. Beginning with advancing the research mission, with the academic health center in place and the planning that's already underway or has taken place for that area, the potential for a new hospital, and then the connections you could establish to the bio discovery district. How do we begin to foster opportunities here for partnership and for improvement in this area that will make best use of the investments that you're about to make and the partnerships you could form in this area? So this will be a key area for advancement and outreach. As we move to the next slide, the idea of reinvesting in the core, not only on East Bank, but West Bank as well, and in St. Paul. How do we think through the new learning environments that we might need to plan for this hybrid digital world coming together? How does that transform the opportunity in the central core for collaboration environments, for improving connectivity between areas where you might have more inclusive environments for students in the broader community? So a reinvestment in this core, a rethink of it, but of course respecting the history and tradition that's represented here, notably at Northup Mall. We move to the next slide. As noted, the transit corridor, an important thread through the entire campus environment, linking East and West Bank and St. Paul. But that not only links the environments physically, but how can it begin to link the environments programmatically in terms of research partnerships and other activities that you may want to develop over the 10-year period. So we view that as an important urban design element, connection element, and experiential element through the campus environments. Moving to the next slide, connection to the river, certainly a tremendous opportunity here, and one set out more than 100 years ago with the Cass-Gilbert plan. That connection to the river from Northup Mall, in recent years certainly made progress toward doing that, but how can we begin to think about that in new and different ways moving forward? It's not only the connection to the river from the East Bank, but from the West Bank as well. That includes the views you can facilitate and obviously the physical connectivity you could achieve. But it also relates to the programmatic opportunities here. The investment in the boathouse is an example of that, but there may be opportunities for research and broader connectivity to the trail networks that are being established in the open spaces along the river. So we'll be looking for that, for those opportunities in this planning process, and would love to hear more ideas on your own experiences there. If we move to the next slide, the idea of integrating campus and community edges, moving back to the east side of campus and the opportunities that are emerging here from some of the recent planning that's been underway for 2407, the triangle formed by University and by Washington Street. How do we begin to think about that area and its relationship to the partnerships that could take place with the hospital, the biodiscovery district, and as well as other opportunities that may emerge from this planning process? So we will want to pay particular attention to this area and think about the urban design strategies and again, the connectivity and programmatic opportunities here. If we move to the next slide, St. Paul will remain an important feature of this planning process. Looking back to the work completed in 2018 and that planning effort and how it can inform what we're doing today, but more carefully align it with the strategic commitments that have now been developed. We will use this as a foundation for the work, understanding that we'll need to look back and review and update as appropriate to take on board some of the new commitments that are emerging. In the next slide, some of these commitments are clear as we think about research and community outreach. The investment in the Bell Museum, an important investment with regard to outreach and community engagement here. The opportunities presented by BioMade and other partnerships that could be formed here on the St. Paul campus. We'll continue to look for those other opportunities as well. And with the Extension Service, VetMed, and of course the agricultural programs here, many opportunities can come about with regard to engagement and other research partnerships you may seek to inform. On the next slide, we are thinking about opportunities here for smart farming, sustainable food, and natural resources. Clearly, everything is here. All of the elements are here programmatically and in terms of the physical development that's taken place over the last century here. How do we use this amazing resource in an urban environment to deliver on this important aspect of your mission, relating that true land-grant heritage, but in a major metropolitan area? So those become important factors in this planning process, and opportunities for continued outreach and partnerships and education as well. We move to the next slide. We're coming back to these starter questions, and these are the questions we would like to open up conversation with you all today on, with the understanding there's certainly other questions that can be addressed, and with the understanding that we'll be scheduling additional meetings with you all for more in-depth conversations about these questions as well as others that you may want to put to our team. So with that, the real purpose of today is for us to hear from you and to understand better how we can help you in this planning process deliver on the strategic commitments that have been set out for the university. And with that, I'd like to open it up to conversation, and we'd love to hear from you on each of these items. So with that, I'll say thank you, and we'll certainly go into listening mode now. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Havens. That's a huge amount of inputs, and you obviously have a nice command of the key issues facing our Twin Cities campus, and bring a nice perspective from the broader world outside the Twin Cities about what's happening and what may happen. So appreciate the comprehensive, thoughtful nature and nice presentation of this stuff. So I know the board or the committee's going to have questions here, and while Jason collects those, I see a handful of hands up already. Let me open with a with a question, and this may be more for Director McKenzie or Vice President Bertelson, but I've seen the square footage number of 29 million some odd square feet of buildings for a long time. And while I don't want to rush to turn that into 28 or 27 million, I'm always interested in seeing how we integrate elimination of old, expensive, or old, useless, or potentially, low use space in an effort to demonstrate to the world that we don't hang on to old stuff forever, that as we add new things, which are expensive and limited when we will add them, we try to offset that by getting rid of some space that we don't have to keep up anymore. So help me get a flavor for just how well, and I know that the university administration wants to do that too, but it's just a rare day when we see us decommission anything or move on. So give me a flavor for, in the committee certainly, for how that principle, if there is such a thing, fits into this.
I'll start, but then we can go beyond that to Chair McMillan and Regents. This certainly is a time, as the president mentioned, there's certain opportune times about having this conversation at the pandemic when so many people are working from home. We've certainly proven that we can do many more things remotely and in hybrid than I think we understood ourselves. And so we're learning as we go. So there are lots of conversations that we are having throughout the university about what is the right way to operate going forward and what are the opportunities. So that's a new thing. So there's probably more to come on that, I will say, but we are having, that is certainly a highlight in the area of focus for the master planning effort. So that will be part of our thing. I think how to best utilize space and what to keep and what not to keep has been part of our conversation for a very long time. We refer to as the building by building plan that really puts a future on every facility, whether it's something that we want to keep in the long term, keep up or fix up, or whether it's one that we want to maintain in a safe place but not plan to keep forever, or one that we actively are looking to decommission and move away from. So in that category, our best example and biggest one is we see that to be the future of the Mayo building, which is almost 900,000 square feet. Of course, it isn't, as you know, it's not simple to just shut down a building. We have to think there's some maybe new space, some renovated space, and so it's a very complicated web. But it is something we are working very diligently toward.
All right. Thank you. I don't think I need more than that. I wanted a confirmation that it's front and center as you go forward. And you're right, Mayo is a big one and probably as complicated as they come in terms of how to eliminate it. But that is a good example of one we're trying to move past and see a future beyond. I've got 5 or 6 regents teed up here. Let's start with Regent Simonson.
Okay, thank you, Chair McMillan. Sorry. Just a couple of questions. As many of you heard me say before, I live in a community where we have a lot of immigrant families. And in our grade schools, again, over 50% are English second language. And so I've recently got involved with a program to reach out to these students with regards to potential secondary education. So we're going to start something going back to the grade schools and then moving up to high school and looking at secondary education. But as I've learned in this process a bit, that some of these, there's multiple dialects and multiple religions, of course, some of these require that a parent or a family member, if a student, a girl wanted to go, a female wanted to go to, say, the university, they couldn't go without a family member to live with them. That's my understanding. And so I wonder what considerations might be involved in that type of thing? Is there something we can do if we're talking about housing, how we can reach to those particular children, if you will? But then I have another question, but I'll leave that one there first.
All right, who wants to tackle that for Regent Simonson?
Well, I'm open if Greg and Monique have something to say. I think I would just say I think that's good input for us, and we will take note of that, and I think talk to Vice President Go and others to research more about that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to, when we can, with the COVID thing, get Vice President Go down here to meet this community. It's a significant group of people, and then we're going to start this program. I said. Second one goes to the discovery, innovation, impact, that type of thing. And I really appreciate where we're going, and that's been an interest of mine, how we can actually increase our revenues from our technology and so on and so forth. But I guess through that process, what's the role of the Office of Technology and Commercialization in this? And then are there going to be metrics? Are there going to be goals? Say that, as you've heard me say before, and you all know, on our 300 and some patents and our intellectual property royalties and stuff, we've like $20 million a year. To me, that's not near what it could be. And so we're going to have metrics assigned with this strategic plan to help grow that as well, not just become national, international leaders, but that type of thing. So hope that makes those questions make sense.
Again, Vice President Bertelsen, tech commercialization, and fitting that into the mix.
Sure, Chair McMillan, Regent Simonson, the spaces, we clearly are looking at the edges of campus and in the St. Paul campus to identify areas of development where public-private partnerships could exist and places we would want to recruit certain industry to be near us, as well as provide opportunities for startups and growth. As to the metrics and goals, I think I would defer to the president for the broader strategic plan conversation.
President Gable, you want to add anything there?
This is Myron. Let me start.
Myron, yes, Vice President, Executive VP Franz, go ahead.
No, not executive. Thanks for the promotion, but just thank you. One of the things that we're looking at, obviously the Chair McMillan and Regent Simonson, the recent Biomaid experience is a good example of, and we're seeing people come to the university with interest in associating with the university in this new biomanufacturing industry sector. That is just an example of how really a forefront thinking, an active way of bringing a new enterprise to this facility, to this enterprise, can really help the U become seen as one of those places where you want to be near or around or associated with. Obviously, space is different these days. You don't always have to be physically connected, but that is just one small example. It's a big example, but just one example of how I think that energy is out there. And so I think, but we're not going to stop there. I think one of the keys that President Gable has really given us some direction on is looking toward other ways, whether it's in our real estate portfolio and developing opportunities for innovation with the medical district, working with our local partners to attract other kinds of activities that promote, support the mission of the university. I will just tell you that I think personally that the future of the University of Minnesota, in terms of the connection with this state and the development of new opportunities, is just overwhelmingly broad, and we need to step into that space in a very aggressive way. So we will be working on developing some metrics, but to be honest, we need to do some more work to really come up with some measures that make sense, that you can get your hands around and kind of understand. But I'll let President Gable clean up anything that I said that may have been inaccurate there.
Thank you.
All right, I don't know if there's more to add or not, otherwise we can move on.
Mr. Chair, I would just confirm everything that Senior Vice President Franz just said.
Very good. All right, we've got lots of regents teed up here. Regent Powell.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thanks to the presenters and Mr. Havens. Thank you for, presenting the overview. This is, we have a great opportunity here with this plan. It's a very big project with many elements, very complex, and so just these are sort of process suggestions that I'm speaking for myself, but maybe these, other regions, these will resonate with other regions. But I guess the first thing is that for me, it would be helpful as we go forward to understand, given the complexity, what are the administration and planners, what do you view as really the priority and pacing projects, for the plan? Because I think if we can understand what those are, it may help us to, start to think more clearly about how this is going to unfold. As I think about them myself, probably simplistically, but I'll throw them out. I mean, you've talked about East Gateway, which is something that's going to happen and is going to be a huge project. You've talked about the importance of clarifying and cleaning up these major transit corridors, which I think is likely going to be a priority. You've talked about the medical campus and increasing the access and the research power. Senior Vice President Franz just talked about BioMaid. So there are a number of things like that. I think that if we can start to place those as pacing, that may help us think about all the other secondary opportunities. I guess the second thought is, we just endorsed as a board unanimously the principles and we like them. This is an exercise, I think, where visuals and pictures are going to be worth 1,000 words. And so the more that we can kind of see, the better the exchange will be. And then the last comments, have to do with things that I didn't hear. But we've talked about in the past. We've talked about the importance of increasing on-campus housing for undergraduates, and as a kind of a key opportunity. Is that a priority within this plan? I haven't heard it mentioned. And then another question like that is, as we look at the development of the St. Paul campus and more and more sort of physical infrastructure, when do we reach the point where perhaps we don't have enough of that urban, agricultural space to complete our mission? I mean, is there a point where we are going to have to distribute that the actual working agricultural land to other places around the system just because, we are in the middle of an urban area and we're filling it up with physical infrastructure? So big comment, lots of points. Whoever wants to take a shot at that, maybe Mr. Havens, you can start off and I'll yield.
No, thank you. Housing will definitely be part of this discussion and conversation. We'll be looking at opportunities and working with the university to understand the goals for housing and how we can best help deliver on those goals. With regard to St. Paul, I think, having worked there previously, that is an important aspect of the mission, and the land use is an important function in terms of laboratory space. We have to respect that, and I think we'll have to look to preserve, what is absolutely essential to accomplish on that campus. And there's certainly enough development opportunity at St. Paul not to have to take up additional land that's in part of the funded research at the moment and will continue to be. So I think through policy and through and just discussion and understanding of what you need to do at St. Paul, we can certainly chart out a longer term view of how research would continue there.
Okay. And how about just as a quick follow up, I mean, the notion of, pacing, activities that will tend to, in a way, drive, many of the secondary opportunities. Is that a legitimate concept, or am I getting ahead of myself?
No, I think we definitely have to understand what are the aspects of this process that are more urgent, if you will, the things that are that we have to understand that decisions are going to be more important in the near term. And we'll have to make sure that we're putting forth ideas and recommendations that address some of the immediate decisions you have to make, but at the same time, position those recommendations in the longer view. So yes, we can prioritize and help with some of the more immediate needs that, as we are beginning to understand, are really coming at the university pretty quickly. So we'll work with, to make sure we address those.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Powell, for what are some comprehensive and I think helpful questions as we all wrestle with how do you prioritize something when everything feels like a priority. I'm going to just intercede here, and I've got a lot of regents left to talk, and I don't want to truncate this discussion because it's important, but I also want people to understand it's not my belief that we are coming back for action, and this is a discussion item right now, and there is no action to follow. So let's continue to work our way down the list, knowing that I've already got us behind schedule, but I don't want to shortchange this, but also realize this is not something coming back next agenda meeting for action. So we've got some time, and if we get the thoughts on the table, the administration can do this. And I think it's a classic example of a retreat worthy style conversation where we could really roll up our sleeves and get into it. But no, I'm going to be watching the clock here a little bit. We've got a lot of equally interesting material to bring forward and a couple of action items yet. So with that, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. Mr. Havens, you've got an exciting project. It's certainly timely, and there's a lot to work with around this campus, as you know. I am concerned that I didn't see in the study area, the Southeast Como area, and when we went through this whole Murphy warehouse exercise a couple of years ago, we determined that that was not the right place for storage. But we also introduced the idea of the need for possibly a centralized operations area, a centralized storage area, sort of a back of the room house for the university. And, we do own property up there. We talked about getting some additional property adjacent to that. And I think we need to have that included. It's a near campus. It's not, quote, on campus, but it's sort of equidistant between St. Paul and Minneapolis. And to not deal with that, I think, is a missed opportunity. And I'll just say this, this process, if it works right, it's going to push business units to relook at their delivery. It's going to push units to look at their business models. Thinking about libraries, when you asked Mr. Havens, or when you mentioned about post-COVID, I can't imagine anything more on the table than the digitization of of our these stacks and the implications that has. But the units have to be pushed to deal with the changes that are coming, and not that they're not thinking about them. But those are a couple quick comments.
I'm going to ask the administration and Mr. Havens just to, if you get a question that's very pointed, make sure you respond. But otherwise, I feel like we're in a mode of the board providing feedback, and this will get consumed and fed back to us as this refinement continues. We probably don't have time I want to get all the region comments in, but we probably don't have time for everybody to respond. So anything else, Regent Beeson, that you want to add, or are you okay at this point?
I'm okay at this point. Yeah.
All right, then let's go to Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. Mr. Havens, this has been a very interesting presentation, and I think it's been very good. Tees up a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. Regarding pandemic learning or post-pandemic learning, or what have we learned during the pandemic, it's kind of interesting because the pandemic is, we think it's going to end soon, but now we're hearing that it may not end soon. So I'm not sure how life will be post-pandemic for the university, but let's just talk about some things that are in your presentation. For example, I'm very interested in the hospital, potential new hospital. That has been something we've been talking about for 5 or 6 years now. And it looks like you have it drawn, or at least you have the words in that picture over a parking ramp. So I'm just concerned that, parking is obviously is a problem on campus too. And until we get to the point of self-driving cars and no need for parking, I think that's still going to be something we're worried about on campus here. Additionally, regarding housing, Regent Powell mentioned housing, and I'm concerned about the loss of housing due to the East Gateway project, which may not happen for the next 10 years or so, but I think we're eventually going to lose, I think it's about 900 beds there. We were told when we approved the Pioneer Hall project several years ago that the other location for housing at the time was planned to be the site of the Boynton Health Center. And I'm not sure if that's still being considered, but I did see housing listed in one of the pictures about engaging the river, which is where Boynton is. Regarding the Mayo building, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. We've been talking about demolition or whatever, I think demolition for that and replacement. That's, as you mentioned, almost 1 million square feet. So I'd like to hear more about that. Regarding the River Flats, my question there is, who owns that space? I thought it was Park Board property, but maybe I'm wrong. And obviously there's a lot of River Flat area there, but I think the one I was talking about, the one I'm talking about is on page 33 of the presentation or the docket. And lastly, or not lastly, but I'm almost done. Safety is a big concern, and obviously we have some discussion about that coming up. But I think we need to think about, how we're doing in policing and being able to safely have all these buildings and probably more buildings in the future. Lastly, the Murphy Warehouse, which was brought up by Regent Beeson. Are we keeping that, or is that for sale again? I'm not sure exactly where we are on that, but I do believe that 20-acre area should maybe be more prominently part of our plan. I don't think it is, and I think it might be for sale, but I still think that that's something we should think about. Thank you.
So thank you, Regent Hsu. So a couple of pointed questions there. I think the broader categories of housing, safety, all that, wait for our next comeback here. But are there quick answers to Regent Hsu's questions about the River Flats land and and Murphy?
Yes, Chair McMillan and Regent Hsu. River Flats, you're right, is owned by the Minneapolis Park Board, though we do work with them closely about shared use or planning, and we are, continue to think about how we can best use that collectively. So I think they believe in that public use. And Murphy is still continue to be part in a sale process. No, not concluded there, but more to come on that. The other parts, we heard your questions. We can work on that with you later.
Regent Hsu, you also raised a good question about what post-pandemic, if there is such a thing as post. So I didn't mean to characterize all your stuff there, but I'm trying to keep us moving forward. So I'm going to move on to Regent Mayeron, I think, next, and there's still 4 or 5 regents after that. So please understand, everybody, why I'm pushing ahead.
Thank you. My comments are focused on 2 things, one Regent Hsu picked up, and that is to make sure that as we talk about this master plan that we keep safety in mind as well for all of those who are participating and entering onto our various campuses. And I think that needs to be built into the analysis. I'm sure it is, but right now, at least in terms of the presentation as we have it, as we look at the different commitments, safety is not identified, and with physical space comes that issue. So I'm sure it will be addressed. I just want to make sure it isn't lost. And the second is, I'm just struck I was looking at page 13 of our docket materials, where we looked at various questions that you put to us under the various commitments. And under commitment 1, student success, item C, what impacts will new learning models have on the physical campus? I think that is such an enormous issue. And I think we're at the very beginning of that issue, particularly now as a result of what we've been doing during the COVID crisis in terms of developing new learning models. And I have to assume that's going to have an impact on our physical campus, at least in terms of that part of our mission that involves education of students, whether that will involve less buildings, different types of buildings, or no buildings as we go forward. And I recognize nobody has a crystal ball, but any thoughts by our expert on this, Mr. Havens, in terms of what you're hearing or seeing about the impact of that on the physical space as it relates to education, I think would be helpful to hear.
Mr. Havens, I'm going to have you hold that answer till we bring you back. I've got a commitment from the administration, obviously up to Chair Beeson or Chair Powell and Vice Chair Swigum, where we go with retreat topics. But all of this stuff's getting assimilated here, and there's some common themes starting to pop up. So with your indulgence, Regent Mayeron, I'm going to keep us moving. Thank you for that input. They're gathering it, and who knows when we get this on a retreat topic, but it feels retreat worthy and commit. And also understanding there's nothing coming back to the board for action in the next 5 6 months.
That's fine.
All right. Thank you. 4 more regents, please keep them big picture, and unless you've got a very specific comment. Regent Rocha, then Davenport, Swigum, and her, and then I have to move on. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as happens, some of the topics have been touched on. And I would note that in ancient times, there was a facilities committee because of the breadth of the topics that are in front of us. And so I appreciate the chair's seeking to manage this. I know it's a challenge. As Mr. Havens talked about, he talked about the Cass Gilbert plan. And you know, for folks that may or may not know, originally the mall was supposed to march all the way to the river. But then the student center was put at the end there, and now we have a Washington Avenue and a light rail that kind of keeps us from doing that. So I appreciate that there's an effort to do that. I think that's really important. We're on one of the great rivers of the world, and to be able to enhance an urban campus with interaction with the river, I'm fully supportive of that and interested in what develops there. And you know, Regent Powell talked a little bit about St. Paul campus. And you know, the thing with the St. Paul campus, you know, with the experiment, with the research and the land that's there, you know, clearly all of our ag research is not limited to the campus. We've got the experiment stations. We've got, you know, we've even had conversations in the past about how one of our system campuses might develop more of an ag focus. But the challenge with that, of course, is that our ag research is now so integrated with all the other research that we do that it'd be, I think, I don't know that it would be a great advancement to move it out of there. I don't think that's what Regent Paul is suggesting. I'm just saying that interaction between ag research on the St. Paul campus and all the other research going on at the university is really important. And it's, while it seems distant, it's actually pretty close. We invested an awful lot in that transitway, and you know, I had a chance to ride it, I guess a couple years ago now, and it's still a very quick trip. So, I mean, there is a connection between the campuses, and I think there's been a bit of almost a marketing issue of the St. Paul campus versus the Minneapolis campus, and that space over there, it's such a, you know, it's a wonderful environment, and I think that, you know, could be touted a bit more and to drive more activity and even student life onto that campus. I want to touch on the fact that you know, we've had a couple of dialogues now about dormitories and the importance of dormitories. I think this is a real issue for us. I think that we already know that academic performance increases, retention increases with the availability of dormitory space. We are well behind our peers. We're at the back of the pack in the Big Ten in what we offer to students in terms of the dormitories, and as we talk about wanting to improve academic outcomes and the ability to attract top students. I think this is a critical area for us. I think we have to move it forward, and that ties into what, you know, Regent Mayeron was just mentioning. I think it's important. I would actually call our safety and security issue a crisis at this point. It's unprecedented the number of calls and contacts that I've had from people that are really concerned about the safety and security on our Twin Cities campus, in particular, and people that are, multiple legacies at the university where their kids are not, whether it's a reality or perception, this is really, really important. And I tie that into the dormitory conversation because as Chief Clark mentioned at our last meeting that dormitories are among the safest areas on campus. Tying that even into what Regent Hsu just talked about, I think that it's very short-sighted at this point for us to not take a look at that substantial piece of property in the Murphy warehouse facility as an opportunity. We're landlocked in a way that most of our peers are not, and the ability, even whether that's even looking at student life space or dormitory space and tying that into the campus, working with the city. I think it's short-sighted if we're not taking advantage of at least looking at what we can do with that facility. The thing with dormitories is they are a source of revenue as well. So it's not, or at least they aren't a liability in the way other facilities might be, and something that I think we need to look at. But I would just close with this, not expecting any responses based on our time issues, but safety and security has got to be a higher priority, and the fact that it's not listed in this as of right now, I think is an omission that we should try to address. But I look forward to additional conversations on this, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Let's move to, with everybody, of course, capturing this input as the administration's doing. Let's move to Regent Mayeron. I'm sorry, Regent Davenport. I got along. My list is changing. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I agree. Most of the points have been made. I agree with them. I'll just reemphasize three. One is hybrid learning, and great consideration needs to be made to that, including maintaining a welcoming environment, the campus as a destination that's accessible and desirable, whether it's for learning or athletics or business. Two, we need to capitalize on the synergy of East Gateway, BioMade, and other initiatives. I'd like to hear more about that. And third, prioritization, or as Chair Powell termed it, pacing. These are big projects. How are we going to take a bite out of the elephant? Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Swiggum.
Mr. Chairman, I could pass with the recognition that we might have discussion at an upcoming retreat.
Good. That sounds like an acknowledgement that maybe you'll help us find space on the retreat agenda.
It is.
I'm putting words in your mouth, Mr. Vice Chair. Sorry. You can tell the board's interest, obviously, or the committee's interest. Regent Her.
Yes. Just a quick comment. I'm wanting to speak up for the St. Paul campus. As in my days at the U, I spent a lot of time on that campus. And as we go forward in terms of planning, I really want to emphasize the need to unify the two campuses in terms of looks and appeal. And I'm excited about Gateway and how we're going to build a great welcoming sense to the Minneapolis campus, but same thing, I'd advocate for the St. Paul side in that as we're bringing in new BioMade, the Bell Museum, I think there's lots of opportunities to integrate the look and feel of the two campuses so that they can be a little more seamless. Thank you.
Good input. Thank you. Before we wrap up, I've got a request from Student Representative Koak to speak. Please be succinct, and you have the floor, or the virtual airwaves here.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. My question is, would you be able to, or whoever can, elaborate on the role that accessibility will play when it comes to considering how future campus development will proceed?
Very good. Let's add that into the topic list, an obviously important one. Appreciate your input there, and I'm glad we caught you. Let's wrap up discussion on item 2, and one that I think will generate almost as much interest. Item 3, an overview of Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester competitive tuition rates and strategy. I will bypass any remarks I had here in the interest of time, other than note that, this is really designed to provide a level set and serve as a contextual set of materials for a much deeper board conversation beginning in March and beyond about individual campus strategies. So think of it that way. We've got President Gable, Associate Vice President Tonneson, and Assistant VP Link Carlson here for this one. I don't know if President Gable wants to frame remarks or hand it right to Julie or Link.
Mr. Chair, just very briefly, this agenda item, along with the two that follow, are markers as we start looking at larger strategic budgeting questions in the months ahead, including those that we think will percolate from the deeper dive conversations that we have pending with each chancellor on their own strategic planning and ultimately the budget discussion that will come up this summer. This agenda item is for context for the board as they think about strategies for those campuses. It's not a set of recommendations. In fact, any potential changes to any of our tuition rates across the system will be part of the traditional budget process that we will talk about in the future. And a lot of the things that we will talk about with the information that you'll receive as context today are going to be in ongoing ways looked at through the lens of the metrics through the strategic planning process that we'll talk about on and off today and in formal context tomorrow. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julie Tonneson and Link Carlson for additional details. Thank you.
AVP Tonneson, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. You can flip to the next slide, please. As the president stated and you did, Mr. Chair, this presentation is designed to provide some basic information on tuition rates at Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses. We are not focusing at all on the Twin Cities as part of this conversation. And on that point, I just want to say up front that Assistant Vice President Carlson and I put this presentation together and then contacted the chancellors for their thoughts and concerns. So we will do our best to weave those in as they coincide with the purposes of our discussion today. There are three major sections for the information that we want to share with you. First, recognizing tuition rates as just one factor among many in a student's decision on where to attend. We then have a series of slides displaying comparative information and historical changes on the rates, and then ending with really a brainstorming response outlining some examples or components of variables that can be or often are considered when we look to make a change with tuition rates. So let's move to the information on the next slide. We wanted to point out that the information we're sharing today and that we will be discussing focus solely on the undergraduate rates and primarily the resident undergraduate rates. As you can see from this slide, the official enrollment numbers, which admittedly exclude the partnership programs at UMR, show only UMD has some portion of their enrollment at the graduate level, and that's only 10%. So the majority of the students on these campuses are undergraduates. It's also worth pointing out that strategic decisions were made in the past to not implement a non-resident tuition differential for the Crookston and Rochester campuses. We also include here for your information the official degree-seeking undergraduate enrollment numbers from this last fall of 2020 and the full-time tuition rates for each campus. The footnote points out, in addition to that both Duluth and Morris participate in the Midwest Student Exchange Program, which for students entering under those specific conditions comes with a tuition rate that is between the approved resident and non-resident rates. It's very true that when we discuss the budget with you or with our state legislators, for example, there's a lot of attention paid to the tuition rates and any potential changes in those rates. However, for this conversation, we thought it might be important and helpful to explicitly say that we recognize that tuition rate is only one variable in a sea really of considerations that students and families face when thinking about higher education and where they want to go. So let's move to the next slide. We don't always talk about them in this setting, but I think there are two primary messages that we keep in mind. Two messages that may appear somewhat contradictory, but in fact, I think are intertwined. First, that tuition rates do have some influence on our enrollment outcomes. And second, they're often not, however, the deciding factor for students. So first, why should we care? What influence do the tuition rates have on anything really? Well, we've listed some of the more obvious influences here, and I'm sure there are others. But clearly for those students that are looking for it, the published tuition rate prior to any conversations about financial aid, just the number itself may put a campus in the maybe pile versus the no way pile for a student. Second, the published tuition rate, when combined with the student's perception of the quality of the experience and the outcomes they will get, creates a value calculation in their mind. They might say, oh, that's totally worth it. Or on the opposite, they might question if the price is worth it. They may also recognize either right away or once they get into their freshman year and beyond that they can't afford to continue to degree. So there is a retention element in the rate. And of course, the tuition rate will influence each student's calculations related to debt. And finally, as tuition is a part of the total cost a student faces, it can dictate how a student experiences their time to degree. If they must work many hours versus few, for example, it can take away from study time and playtime. And as I mentioned, there are surely other influences that we didn't put on this slide, but we could gather from meeting with students and families very quickly. So moving on to the next slide, as I mentioned, it is not only, tuition is not only and sometimes not the primary consideration for students looking to choose a college. Here are some reasons that students mentioned as driving their choice of school in 2 recent surveys. I won't read them all, but obviously in addition to cost, students factor in things like financial aid offerings, which we'll talk about in an upcoming slide, and the academic experience in terms of quality programs, quality facilities, academic major choices available, and so on. You will see some comparative information in an upcoming slide that Assistant Vice President Carlson will share. And as we view that data, we need to keep in mind that price is not the only factor. We can't forget that students are intelligent and multifaceted, and they will balance all of their goals with price in making what in the end is a judgment of value for them individually. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Carlson for the next slides.
AVP Carlson, welcome to the committee.
Will put my mute off here. Thank you, Chair McMillan. And before I dive into these, some of these data, I just wanted to reiterate that Julie and I received robust feedback from the chancellors about this presentation, maybe more feedback per slide than I've been given in a while, but all with the best of intent. And they wanted to, all the chancellors wanted to make sure that we and all of us understand really a lot of the complexity and nuance around pricing in relation to student enrollment, retention, graduation, and future student success. My understanding is in the coming months, chancellors from each campus will again be presenting to you on the strategic state of their campuses, and the chancellors can really best put these data in context of among many, many other factors they consider for their individual campuses and their success. So we look forward to that. I'm also personally excited for the strategic planning metrics discussion tomorrow, as you would expect me to be, where one of the metrics is the commitment to refreshing a system-wide enrollment plan. And I'm certain that tuition and overall cost of attendance and financial aid opportunities for students on all our campuses will be considered as part of that plan. So that is first and foremost in the system-wide strategic plan. Second, while we were asked to have this presentation not be about the Twin Cities campus, it's important to recognize that students make choices among our 5 campuses as well, both at the point of admission and in transfer activity. Just for transparency, the tuition required fees for the Twin Cities campus this year is $15,142, or about $1,500 to $3,000 higher than the 4 campuses on the top of the slide in front of you. There's also differences in the amount of scholarships aid available for students, even if we try to standardize programs like our Promise program system-wide. So there's lots of nuance in here. With that, this slide shows the tuition required fees for Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester. The Minnesota State campuses in the middle there have stayed relatively bunched, and Regent Davenport might actually have additional insight here, but we've seen some allowance over the years for slight variation in both tuition increases and differential fees among these campuses. And then we've also included a lesser set of regional universities and their published tuition fees for Minnesota residents. So North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin all use the reciprocity agreements in slightly different ways, which again is beyond the scope of this presentation. But I would just point out that both North Dakota institutions have increased their tuition rates that Minnesota residents would face quite significantly in the past 2 years. That gap between our system campuses in the North Dakota State for a long time was $3,000–$4,000, and as you can see now, it is creeping ever closer. Finally, I would just point out that if you look at all the public campuses on this slide, you would find that those campuses on the top, our campuses, Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester, often have four-year graduation rates that are 10%, 15%, sometimes 20% percentage points better than the other campuses that are represented here. We can discuss individual program quality, many other factors, but just know that our campuses on the top of this slide are very high quality campuses within the region, within their peer group. 4-year graduation rates just being one indicator. Next slide, please. Just wanted to make sure we had the recent history of tuition rate increases in front of you, including our system campuses being at about 0.5% per year for over the past 8-year period. So very low by historical standards. Next slide, please. We know that tuition and fees are not the only cost for students and families, and we know there's a lot of interaction with financial aid. So we routinely look at this slide, which is the average net price for students from families in various income brackets. And these are data that we and all institutions report through IPEDS. So again, net price is the total cost of attendance, so tuition and fees, but also housing and dining, books, and so on, minus all gift aid. That is any aid that does not have to be repaid. So that would include Pell, Minnesota State Grant, Promise, scholarships, and so forth. And the story of this slide is that for families with incomes of $75,000 or less, which is more or less the state's median family income, all 5 of the University of Minnesota campuses are the most affordable 4-year institutions in the state and across the region for Minnesotans. And that generally holds true all the way up to $110,000 a year in family earnings. So that's actually a very remarkable slide in my book that certainly for a majority of Minnesotans, if you're looking at net price, we are the most affordable institutions in the state. Every family's situation is different. But that's, I think, something we should be proud of. The next slide, please. We also monitor average student loan debt, of course. And I'll just say here that in this case, it's students with that have debt. Again, all of our campuses fall below the statewide average and the system-wide strategic plan. There are commitments to continue to working to lower these average loan numbers over time. And one more slide, please, for me. For this, my last slide, these are campuses where students applied and were admitted, but ultimately chose a different campus to enroll in as a freshman, and then showing the tuition and fees for those alternate choices. These just happen to be the top 5 non-University of Minnesota institutions where students took an alternate choice. To be clear, the #1 alternate for all of these campuses is the Twin Cities campus, University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. And that's probably true for a lot of colleges in the state, just given the size and scale of the Twin Cities campus. The #2 alternate for Crookston, Morris, and Rochester is UMD. So there's a lot of within within system student behavior understanding to be done as well. But really, this is just meant to show the variety of tuition rates at institutions where students are choosing when they don't choose us. A set of data behind these charts is found on pages 42 and 44 of your docket material. But I'll just say that students ultimately enroll in literally hundreds of different colleges. Even though they apply to our campuses and they are admitted by our campuses. We had a student that applied and was admitted to Crookston that ultimately chose Yale. Well, you win some, you lose some. There's a student that applied to admitted to Crookston that ultimately chose the University of Hawaii. And despite it being 27 below this morning in Crookston and 79 today in Honolulu, if that student was really interested in equine science, they probably made the wrong choice, or they could have enrolled in a great online program from Crookston. So there's lots of variation in these data. And with that, I'll turn it back to Associate Vice President Tonneson for concluding remarks.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. And you can go, yeah, there you go. Given the information then that we've shared so far today, we recognize, and through conversations we've had in the past, we recognize there will be differing views of how we should approach tuition rate strategy going forward for these campuses. To the extent that we want to make changes that we believe will influence students' decisions about where to attend or influence the amount of debt they hold or their experience while they're in school, some of those thoughts and ideas we touched on earlier, then there are really many different ideas that can be considered for a tuition rate strategy. But as in all things budget, I want to point out that nothing really acts in isolation. For each change you may think about pursuing, we need to also think about the differing impacts and the trade-offs. And I have just a few examples to perhaps bring that to light a little bit. First, implementing reductions in the tuition rates on these campuses will not automatically increase enrollment, and therefore most likely will reduce revenue to the institution overall. But it will also have disparate impacts across the campuses that might not be quite so obvious. While tuition is estimated to be roughly 38 to 40% of annual revenues this year for Crookston, Duluth, and Rochester, it is estimated to be 23% of annual revenues for Morris. So making a similar reduction in that revenue generating capability for each of these campuses means more in terms of budget impacts for some than it does for others. Or another example, looking at changes in tuition rates for these campuses without looking at that interplay between them and the Twin Cities campus, and without looking at each campus's ability to offer financial aid, is kind of like moving down a path with blinders on in a way, because these factors act in concert with each other to create a whole picture that students react to combined. And then the final example, the ability to affect lower net price for students, as Assistant Vice President Carlson mentioned with the financial aid picture. We really shape that by the types of aid we're able to offer, which differ by campus. But we do that often in a targeted way that may achieve some goals that actually differ from the goals that we're trying to achieve through changing tuition rates. So these are all difficult analytical issues. So we need to think about each decision and be very thoughtful. And we need to make those decisions in the context of multiple goals and priorities as we move forward. Next slide, please. And with that word of caution, we wanted to leave you with some orders of magnitude, kind of doing exactly what I just said we cannot do, which is looking at changes in isolation. However, I hope you will see that this information sharing is really a first step in what would be a more robust analysis. You can see what just the lowering of tuition by 1% or $1,000 would lead to in reduced revenue, and then what lowering the tuition rates to the levels of some of those regional competitors would lead to in reduced revenue. Any of these actions would have to be made up then with enrollment growth, replacement revenues, or budget cuts. Budget cuts on top of what we have been facing with the pandemic, and on top of significant budget cuts some of these campuses faced even before last March. This presentation and these slides are perhaps bent toward assumed goals leading to reduced tuition rates and the potential impact of that action. But here we could conversely indicate the impact of raising tuition rates to achieve different goals related to program quality and program enhancement, in which case we need to consider the impacts on students. So it's a complicated topic, and the conversation needs to be shaped by the overarching goals we're trying to achieve and the priority placed on those goals. And with that, Mr. Chair, we are happy to engage in a conversation if that fits your plan for today.
Very good. Thank you, both EVPs, Tonneson and Carlson. Appreciate that. Nice job getting through a fair amount of data with some really, I think, insightful contextual perspectives. I've got one detail question, and that is the last slide that EVP Carlson had up. And just so I understand, and I think you walked through this with me, Julie, when we were previewing the docket, the information there about what a student's deciding to do. When we say a student, let me make it up, at Morris decides to go to UMD, or a student at UMD decides to go to the Twin Cities, we didn't capture that there. All we captured was a student at Morris who decides to go to South Dakota State, right?
Chair McMillan, you are correct.
Okay.
The number one alternate for all of these campuses would be the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. And the number two school for Crookston, Morris, and Rochester would be the University of Minnesota Duluth.
Very good. Okay. And I think we've seen some of that data as we've had the system-wide enrollment planning conversation that President Gable has so nicely brought to the front here for us. So that's probably a different conversation. But thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to start with Student Representative Tojo Garcia. Then I've got 3 or 4 regents queued up after that.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, presenters. So the first question I have relates to scholarship disbursement, and I'm glad that it was brought up during the course of this discussion. During the course of our research last year for the compilation of the report of the student representatives to the Board of Regents, we learned about the scholarship tracking and reporting system, which was developed internally in 2012 and 2013. And we found that its implementation has actually led to the disbursement of millions more dollars of scholarship money that was previously held by the university and was inaccessible to students. Could you provide any updates or details on how the implementation of that system could be used moving forward to ensure that students receive the maximum financial aid possible?
Chair McMillan.
Vice President Carlson.
Thank you. Representative Tojo Garcia, I'll take a shot at that since I was involved in developing that. You're right. The purpose behind developing that system was really driven in large part because student financial aid scholarship awarding is very complicated. It's often connected to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different donors combining with various university pots of money, and the intent was not completely, but one main intent was to make sure that we were dispersing all of the student financial aid, including that held in the foundation and in university accounts, to students to the maximum extent possible. And I think the deans and the Office of Student Finance would tell you that that's been very successful. We are also starting projects to further enhance scholarship tracking systems and mechanisms within the college. I don't know if I would call it a phase 2 of STARS. It's just trying to give offices that award scholarships the maximum transparency and opportunity to get those dollars awarded.
Okay, I think that I want to keep us focused on the tuition side of this, but as Student Representative Tojo Garcia notes, it's the financial aid, philanthropic piece of it, and merit aid is obviously, fits into the picture. But this discussion today is more about the tuition side of things. So with that, let me go to Regent Powell, I think is next.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, presenters. My interest in this presentation and maybe others was just concern that, with respect to our competitive set, we may be overpriced, and that, and that may be harming outcomes in terms of, interest in these institutions, which I agree are very high quality, and enrollment. And I appreciate, the work you put into this and the engagement of the chancellors. And if your view is that, could be a factor, but there are a lot of factors here, and tuition reductions would do more harm than good. I have no interest in kind of forcing, that kind of action, but it does sort of raise the higher level question, which is, it's really critical and imperative that we, sustain and grow enrollment on these campuses. And so I look forward to the strategic planning discussions that we're going to have with each of the campus leaders. And, I guess my view is if we need to rethink the purpose and the program and the student experience, and the outcomes, and improve or change or strengthen those in order to, improve enrollment and success. I mean, we really have to do that. It's very important. So glad you looked at this. If it's a mistake to do it, I accept that. But we still really have this key issue that we have to address in declining enrollment at these campuses. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Powell, and I'll take that in the commentary. As the commentary side of things, and fully agree with you. Let's see here. Regent Hsu is next.
Thank you, Chair McMillan and presenters. This is very interesting. I do want to point out that I don't think we touched much on the Native American tuition waiver at Morris, which is very costly. We haven't talked about it in a while. I'm not exactly sure how it's being paid for. And that's one thing that we talked about at a retreat a couple of years ago, and I don't think we did anything about it. But we were going to, I think, look into it further, and I haven't heard much about it since. So I just wanted to point that out since it jogged my memory. So declining enrollment is obviously an issue, and maybe we're overpriced. I think what we're seeing here is, and it was just mentioned briefly, that enrollment increases is another way to solve this, and we don't know. It's the whole old elasticity argument. We don't know what happens when we reduce tuition. Do we get more enrollment? It was just mentioned briefly. I think we need to understand that better. Again, that's another thing we've talked about for years and we haven't made any progress on. But I would say, looking at admissions, I know we've explored test optional. I think we need to continue to look at ways of getting people through the admissions process, which starts by getting them interested in the campus or the school to begin with. So I'll just leave it at that. I think it's a good presentation in terms of the information that was provided, but I do think we need to look a little further in terms of analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu, and we will look a little further. This, again, is contextual as the chancellors come back. All this stuff fits, so good points. Regent Sviggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think I have also just comments and don't need any response from anybody. But as I looked at the slides in preparation for your meeting, Mr. Chairman, it struck me that when you add it all together, you look at the applications, you look at the graduation rates, which are very, very high, financial support, and then the tuition comparisons between the various schools. I came to the bottom line that we're a pretty good value at the University of Minnesota at all our campuses. And in life, you look for value. You look for what the cost is and what the performance is, whether you're buying a car or whether you're going to school. And I think that when you add all those things together, the University of Minnesota with our campuses right now exists as a pretty good value. So I'm going to step back, I think, just very, very quickly to what I've mentioned a couple times in meetings, and specifically to Assistant Provost or VP McMaster, to Bob McMaster, that if when you look at and you see that the Twin City campus is the number one alternate for attendance for the students that apply to the other campuses, I really think we can enhance all the campuses, enhance all 5 campuses, enhance the enrollment if we would just tell students that, if you want to attend Twin Cities campus and you'll attend one of the other 4 campuses for a year or 2, we'll guarantee you admittance if you meet a certain grade level, if you keep up your studies. I tell you, once they get to Duluth, they're going to stay in Duluth. But I think that promise of being able to go to the Twin City campus that we've talked about, or I've talked about to Mr. McMaster, would be as important or more important than some type of tuition reduction. I just think, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop. I think we're a pretty good value.
Thank you, Regent Swigum, and you're right. No one leaves Duluth once they get there. So let's, the fascinating intersection here and the critical intersection is the system-wide enrollment planning conversation and the system campus strategic plans. And that's exactly why this is before us, and each element of that's coming back to us. But good thoughts around value. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's really, really good conversation here. I'm a little bit concerned about data. I take a bit of a different perspective than Regent Swigum on this. I mean, I don't disagree that we provide a great value, but you can't argue with the numbers. I mean, the enrollment challenges that we have, it doesn't matter what those of us that are well past this period of decision making in our lives think. It's what does the market think? And the challenge that we have is, as AVP Tonneson said, and I completely agree with her, that the tuition rate that's posted can knock institutions out of the consideration from the get-go. I recall when I was an undergrad on the Twin Cities campus, I drove a school bus in the morning as a part-time job to help pay for school, and I had elementary kids, and I'd ask them all the time where they wanted to go to college to try to plant that seed, and kids would often say, I'm not going to college in 2nd, 3rd grade. And I'd say, well, why not? Well, we can't afford it. And so they already had a perception of affordability. Well, even kids that are in high school, they have these same challenges. And so we may see these numbers. And again, I would, we've got people that are waived from tuition included in these numbers. I don't think I could get into these numbers a little bit more and see that they're dancing a little bit here. But the fact is that it's the kids that aren't even applying. It's the people that aren't even applying. That's the problem. It's not, you can pick an individual here, an individual there, and say, oh, well, they chose to go to Yale or Hawaii, but that's not who we're talking about here. We're talking about people that didn't even apply. And and here's the challenge. And again, Regent Paul, I think, is dead on as far as we got to figure out these numbers, these enrollment challenges. We're falling back in the demand queue. You can see over the last 30 years, for those who've watched higher ed over that period, that the demand for the large comprehensive research university has gone through the roof across the nation. It's undeniable that that's where the demand is, and that the small rural schools are not in the demand that they were when we were a more rural population to start from. More kids are growing up in metropolitan areas, and therefore they're not necessarily wanting to go out into what they consider the hinterlands, and as opposed to when we were more agrarian and people wanted to stay in something that was more similar to what they were used to. That's why North Dakota can raise its tuition on Minnesota students. They're still lower than we are in our system campuses for our students, for Minnesota students. And of course, you can understand that the Dakotas have got a big population challenge, and finding Minnesota students that'll come out there and help their populations very, very attractive to those states. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? we've got a huge outmigration of people that are interested in rural settings or would be interested in smaller campuses leaving our state. And at the same time, we're actually going to justify being a higher sticker price before they've even applied any place. That doesn't make any sense at all. We might ask some of the folks in our marketing and economics departments as to how that stuff works out. So I look at this and say that there's absolutely no question that we have got to do something to make ourselves sticker price competitive with all these institutions. And then we can do all the other, I'm sure there's all kinds of other financial aid and things that are not necessarily included in some of the data that we're looking at, but there's no question in my mind that we are creating our own problem. When we are priced higher than institutions that are by nature of a greater demand to the current students coming out of high schools across the state, across the country, we shouldn't be surprised when we are having enrollment challenges. And we need to, when you look at the numbers, the dollars that it would take to reduce the tuition to these various levels that we have on there, we as an institution have to be fully committed to reducing the cost of our overall operations to come up with the money necessary to support these system campuses as we determine what they're going to do in the long run, as Regent Powell articulated. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Let's turn to Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. Going to Regent Shu's comments about the American Indian waiver, I think this is something that the administration should take up with Washington, and it should become part of the American Indian stimulus conversation. We bear 100% of the responsibility for the boarding school legacy that came out of that campus, and we got that because we took over the campus. But the policy about American Indian boarding schools had everything to do with the federal government, and so they, in my view, share responsibility to finance these waivers going forward. So I hope that issue does get elevated nationally. Second, I think we've got to be a little more, there are other options when we look at the models. We could go at Crookston and Morris to a flat, single tuition, flat rate, a net price. And it would be interesting to run those numbers to see where that would take us. It might mean that the low and moderate income families have to pay a little bit more. But that the middle income folks we would get an increase in numbers from that group, all of which would result in a higher net tuition dollar amount, because that's at the end of the day what we're trying to do. We're trying to increase the dollars that come into those campuses, and there's lots of ways to do that. But that's a Concordia St. Paul model that has, you pay one price. Well, why not try to introduce that with those campuses? And the third, Budget Director, would you put up the slide you had around tuition banding and options? And I'm going to make a quick comment on that, Mr. Chair. I promise not to be too much longer here.
That would be Jason.
Okay, whomever. I'll talk as that's going up. And what I want to ask the Budget Director is, you're making estimates about what dollars we would lose if, no, that's not the slide. It's there. So, Julie, this is real money we would lose. It's not, you factored out money we're not getting anyway through the Indian waiver or that's paid by another source that would continue. So all that's been factored out, right? This is just real money that would hit the campus books by pricing it, right?
Mr. Chair, Regent Beeson, that is true, but it also does not include any offset if enrollment would increase. So
I'll get to that. So my point is, how many new students would we have, just use the back of the napkin, how many new students would we have to get in Morris and Crookston, using them as examples, to offset these dollar amounts? Let's say if we lowered this to NDSU at Crookston $1.5 million, how many new students would we have to attract to pay for that loss in income?
I'm not sure we're ready to do that calculation on the fly. Your point.
No, I know. I'm just trying to make a point, Mr. Chair, about it's a lot of new students, right?
Mr. Chair, Regent Beeson, it would be, yes. To offset, for example, a $1.2 million tuition loss at Crookston might take, up to 100 students. I mean, it would be significant.
Okay. Well, I just want to put that in sort of that's a risk. That's a risk to do that. It's easy to say, and I've been advocating dropping these, but there is a risk that we don't ever recoup that money and it becomes another drag on our earnings. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, staff.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. I've got 3 remaining regents, Regent Davenport, then Kenyanya, and then Mayoron, and then we're moving on to the next item. Go ahead, Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you for the excellent presentation, VP Thomason. I think examining the influence on tuition choice is important, especially as we look at that value proposition that Regent Sviggum and Rocha brought up. And also it links to our branding strategy. Second, on the slide that was just up, it's the next slide that has potential options. I think we should look at all of those. And I think they might be variable options depending on the campus. But a question for Mr. Kelson, and you don't need to answer it today, is when you look at summer school, do we have data that as shows where first choice, second choice, where do our students take summer school classes from? I suspect there maybe know where they do. It isn't always from their home campus, but it might be local, it might be at a community college or whatever. So I think that might be something to take a look at, and how do we do better there? And then could you clarify for me, so we're using the same definition of a 3+2 plan?
AVP Carlson, can you tackle that second question? The other one's for, I think, future analysis, but the last question from Regent Davenport.
Yes, Chair McMillan, Regent Davenport. The 3+2 pro idea is shorthand for a variety of programs that have popped up around the country where students may take lots of combinations, 3 years of undergraduate work and 2 years of master's level or postgraduate work, resulting in both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree within 5 years, right? So kind of saving a year on that. You can imagine, however, different combinations of those ideas among all of our campuses, right? Where maybe you have a program where the first 3 years is at Morris and the finishing year, because of some specialty, is at Duluth.
Thank you. Thank you. And if I may, 2 more quick ones. The structured cohort program tuition discount, I think, is worth looking at, especially in high need programs, and where we might have business partners step to the plate with some kind of financial aid. And then just one last note, we're talking about new students. I just want us to remember that retention of existing students is huge in the budget calculations as new students are. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. Let's see. I've got Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and presenters, for the presentation. A lot of my comments have been, said and questions asked. I wanted to applaud and encourage the 3+2, the cohort and things like that. Where I was talking about lowering the cost, for students, and like many of my colleagues, I think the easiest way to do that, or one of the easier ways, is to lower their time, they're in college, right? To increase the graduation rates. I know we have a lot of advocates for PSEO here and whatnot, and the 3+2, it's like grad school PSEO, the way I see it almost. So I mean, to the extent that we could have more programs like that and advertise them, I think that'd be good. In the discussion that Regent Beeson started there, I think it's a good one, AVP Thomason. I mean, you said, obviously, you can't just do one level of analysis. You have to look at the others, and we kind of started seeing that there. Obviously, going down to the North Dakota levels and whatnot, we might not be able to make that up in students, but perhaps the 1%, right, we might be able to. But does a 1% drop bring the 10 students or so? So obviously, there's much more to be done there, and I looking forward to seeing that discussion happen and figuring out what that spot may be. Also, Regent Swiggum, I think, mentioned that if we get the students there, and by there I think you're referring to system campuses, they'll stay. And as much as I enjoyed the conversation about how no one leaves Duluth there, I don't know if that's factually true. I mean, I believe the number one transfer destination for UMD students is the Twin Cities campus, right? I mean, that's about 20% or so. Well, I don't know if they transfer, but but 20% of the freshman class isn't returning for that second. I don't have the exact numbers, but I'd love more analysis around that, because we know there's that system interplay in admissions, but it also exists within transfer, right? And I'm glad that we're acknowledging that. And you talked about how we have to be aware that decisions on one campus, and more specifically, I mean, the Twin Cities campus, right? How those are going to ripple out, and then Duluth to Crookston and Morris. I think what I'd like to see going forward is now when we are making those decisions, the full conversation. I mean, we now know that, right? But when a decision's made about growing the freshman class here or the wait list or something like that, we're not having that full conversation about, okay, what do we do? Because we know, I don't know how many, but there are going to be 10 or 20 students, I don't know, that probably would have gone elsewhere in the system. And that, on the campuses that are having budget issues, I mean, that's a lot, those 10, 20 students are a lot. So I think I'm glad that we've acknowledged the interplay, and it's not the first time. I mean, we've done it before, but now we gotta have that full conversation when we're making those decisions that we know go into the affect the rest of the system. And then my last, more of a comment really than a question. I think students, families, regents, administrators. I don't know if we all coalesce on what we think tuition is based off of, right? And what that represents, because that's why you hear a lot students wondering, why am I paying the same if it's online, or why am I paying the same if it's in the summer, or if it's shorter, or if it's this and that. And I don't know that I have that answer, but I think people have different perceptions of what that number represents, and I don't know if there is a true one, but I just like to have that conversation at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. A lot of moving, interconnected parts, and as many of you have noted, the enigma that is price elasticity in higher education continues to challenge us. I'm not sure enigma is the right word, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one to see through. So let's wrap up with Regent Mayeron and then on to item 4 on our agenda.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. My question has to do with the reasons students give for choosing a college, and it shows up on slide or page 50 of our materials on the slide there. And the reasons that were cited were a national survey, and then I take it that the 2019 admitted student survey, Twin Cities campus, I'm assuming that is a survey that was actually done of our own students. My question is, have we looked at or done a survey of those students who were offered or admitted to the campuses and chose the other campuses as to what was driving them? So in other words, rather than relying on national surveys, looking specifically at those students that we lost to other campuses or colleges around, whether it's North Dakota or South Dakota. And my second question is, have we parsed this data down into gender, race, ethnicity, because that all has a bearing on our, as we're going to look at in future presentations in the next day, has to do with our ability to recruit and to retain, for example, persons of color and gender, et cetera. So, which is very important to the university as well. So I'm wondering whether we have looked at this data by those other dimensions in addition to a more general presentation, which is what we have here.
Is there a quick answer to Regent Mayeron's questions, or do you want to come back to that, administration?
Chair McMillan, Regent Mayeron, I'd give you not a full answer, but just a couple points. One is we do occasionally try to survey and ask about for students that we admitted but went elsewhere. We don't really have an affiliation with them once they've not chosen us, so the response rates get pretty small, but we do on occasion try. To your second question on the slicing and dicing our own survey results, I'm quite certain that the admissions offices on all the campuses do that sort of work. I haven't personally seen it, but it's doable if we're collecting the right demographic information up front.
Thank you. I'm going to.
I think that information on the backside is very important for us to get as it relates to our efforts with recruitment and retention of non-white individuals, for example.
Agreed. All right, we need to move on or we won't get to a couple action items at the tail end of this, and we still have the workforce report, which I'm going to turn to now. And Vice President Horstman, I do think some contextual remarks here are important, and here's what I want to say about that. This is an important annual item, and it comes to us annually, but and in doing so serves several functions for us. The report not only sets up future conversations as we consider our workforce and how it also helps us inform what we want to do with the Impact 2025 plan, and it's critical to developing a 2022 annual operating and biennial budget, obviously, given that something north of 70% of our costs relate to people. So it's very informative, but at this point, it is an information item. We're not acting on it. We're using it as baseline information to move forward with. And the last comment I have is that many of you, but many of you will not recognize and see that this is the work that underpins this, i.e., developing job families and starting to refine and substantially sophisticate the tools that Interim Vice President Horstman and President Gable have to work with, has been underway here for 5 or 6 years. And what you see today is the output of some of that, is they're able to look at job families and then go out and benchmark those against the market. So it didn't happen overnight, and they're not done yet, but that's my comments. Interim Vice President Horstman, please jump in, and I'm going to need you to keep moving as you go through this.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regents, student representatives. I will do that. And we can move to slide 2. In recent years, when we've come before you to discuss this, we have started to bring benefits in as a component of this report to speak to the competitiveness and cost of our health plan and retirement plans, our time off components. In addition to covering the 3 annual reports today, we will also take a look at how our main benefits of health and retirement impact the position to the market median and the position of our employees in that regard. Next slide. I'm not going to recite this to you, but for a background, there is a Regents policy, obviously, that covers compensation. And actually, we take this and are very mindful of this and how we construct our compensation structure, the practice we put into compensation, in how we look at benefits in addition to compensation and compare that to our peers. As we review this information, I will also note that there are shifts that occur, particularly in senior leadership and staff. As you look at percentile of senior leadership to market and staff comp ratios, we have enhanced our compensation analysis over the last several years. It is more accurate, more robust, and updated much more frequently. And so that has impacted the position to market because our information is more accurate. It does not necessarily mean that employees have been impacted in their actual pay. We also have an anomaly this year that I'll speak to on one of the system campus reports. Next slide, please. I'm just going to briefly walk through the context of our employee population and not plan to spend a lot of time here. Some of this information was provided in December when we spoke about non-recurring budget savings. One point that I can update from when the docket was submitted, we recently looked at our overall headcount system-wide as a result of the impact of the retirement incentive program. And the fall snapshot number of 26,630 at the end of January sits at 25,930. So we have come down almost person for person what we experienced with the RIO, and that is the lowest point since 2016. Our salary and fringe represents 62% of non-sponsored expenditures during this year. That has been pretty stable over the last several years. And all total, that represents $1.6 billion in salary and another $560 million in benefits, which would include FICA payments by the university and Medicare. Next slide, please. We also look at overall data analytics on our entire employee population in order to see how our workforce may be shifting over time. And we look at this by employee group, by organizational role at the university, the type of work they do, by average age for employee group, and by diversity. And this informs how we should set our strategies going forward. Next slide, please. This is a retirement zone analysis that we look at, and given we just experienced the RIO, I thought it might be informative. Over the last several years, we on average experience about 430 to 450 retirements each and every year. In 21 and 20, because of the RIO, we have excluded that. That obviously would raise it quite a bit. But our overall retirement has declined slightly in the last year in the moderate and high areas of retirement risk. Next slide, please. Our annual report can be summarized at a high level as follows. The senior leader rankings for base salary and total cash compensation are slightly lower than the rankings last year. Aggregate faculty salary comparisons to the market overall, Twin Cities, Duluth, Crookston, and Morris together remain steady. The P&A and civil service job families that have been refined reflect a position to market median that ranges from 8 to 20% below the market median. And again, as I said, this does not mean that the position below market is a recent development. It's rather the result of the analysis that we have been doing over the last several years. It should be noted that this report excludes the impact of unpaid furlough and pay reduction during FY21. Next slide, please. We do use data sources, and in fact, we have a deep database of relevant compensation market data, utilizing over 30 formal third-party salary surveys to benchmark salaries. These surveys are from well-known consulting firms and professional organizations that are familiar to you, such as Culpeper, Mercer, Willis Towers Watson, and Coupa. Any survey we purchase and use for analysis must use professional and valid methodologies, focus on the markets in which we compete for talent, and be conducted periodically to allow for year-over-year comparisons. Next slide, please. We additionally have benefit benchmarking surveys to help us understand how our benefits compare to market. For the purposes of this report, we will focus on three. The first is a biannual Willis Towers Watson report on Minnesota employers, which, including the university, covers 28 large private and public employers in the state in aggregate and individual comparisons. We also have worked closely with Willis Towers Watson to develop a customized survey to assess our own health plan, the Employee U Plan, to relevant markets, including large public employers and large private in the state of Minnesota, as well as using the data received in a recent Purdue-initiated higher ed survey of employee benefits that included health plan information on 26 peer institutions. The method of purchasing salary surveys and then separate benefit surveys is a standard across all organizations. At this time, there is no national or regional total reward survey that combines all of this information into one tidy package. Next slide, please. To know if our compensation and benefits are competitive with the market, we must first agree on what we define as our market for talent. It is typical for top leaders to disagree about the definition of their organization's market. However, agreement can come quickly if you just ask two simple questions. When we hire faculty and staff, what institutions or companies are they coming from? And when we lose faculty or staff, to which institutions or companies do we lose them to? Just being able to answer these two questions, and this can be answered quickly by most HR professionals, managers, senior leaders, deans. It is a simple answer to how we define our market. Next slide, please. The quickest way to know an employee or group of employees are paid to market is to calculate a compa ratio, which we have discussed before. A compa ratio is simply the person's pay divided by the university's salary range midpoint or median salary in the marketplace, as in this example. You need to be very careful when interpreting overall compa ratios for a group of employees. As in the slides that I will be going over, we must keep in mind that an organization can have an overall healthy ratio, but have areas where employees are paid quite low to market, and the opposite is true as well. We will assume for the purposes of our report that there is a normal distribution across all employee groups in the peers selected, and this would support an overall compa ratio of 1.0. Next slide, please. For senior leaders, prior to 2016, data sources utilized for comparison were not consistent from year to year and often did not have standard and preferred controls typically found within formal salary surveys. Beginning in 16, we committed to purchasing and reporting data from a consistent set of surveys that met desired reporting standards and compared salaries to each campus's peer institutions. This change in practice allows the university to understand how our senior leaders are paid relative to market and how that stance changes over time. The definition of market varies by campus, but includes national higher education institutions of comparable size and scope called peer institutions. Our senior leaders are paid on average at the 32nd percentile of the market for base compensation for 2020, which is down from the 34th percentile the prior year. Our senior leaders are paid on average at the 34th percentile for total cash, which is down from the 35th percentile the year before. Next slide, please. Overall, percentile rankings for base salary and total cash compensation are slightly lower than the year before. Since we have implemented this methodology, we should note that we have seen a base pay drop among senior leaders in 2016 from the 45th percentile to the present 32nd. Total cash has likewise dropped from the 50th percentile to the 35th. This is not necessarily a change in incumbent salary, as I mentioned in other points previously stated, but it can be explained by the fact that we hired a number of new senior leaders during this time frame and how those salaries impacted that percentile and the comparison to the peers. Next slide, please. Faculty-based salary benchmarking is based on comparisons to peer institutions, with the exception of the University of Minnesota Rochester, which has a unique set of comparisons we are still developing. Leadership for each campus has selected a list of institutions in collaboration with the Office of Institutional Research that provides what they feel are appropriate academic comparisons, which includes compensation. The University of Minnesota salaries for faculty have remained roughly at the same market position over recent years. The comparison data within this report does have limitations. It's based on overall faculty salaries rather than comparisons of salaries with each area of academic study. And obviously, some areas of academic study require higher salaries than others, and the proportion of those type of positions in your institution can affect how you are compared to in the peer market. Faculty salaries reported in the 2019 AAUP survey show that for the Twin Cities, the overall comp ratio is slightly down from the year before, and that the Morris faculty salaries are steady with the year before. What I would say about Duluth, and I should note this, and this is what a limitation in and of itself, we had a specific peer whose median salary dropped significantly year over year. And what that did for everyone in this study that was an institution in the Duluth market was increase their comp ratio significantly for this year. However, we can take a look at that, and it is important when that happens to look at the actual rankings. In reality, Duluth's position to market has not really changed that much. They have been in the lower third of their peer institutions for some time, and they continue to be so. The prior year, they were 6 of 9 with that peer institution included that had the drop this year. This year, they are 8 of 9. If we pulled that peer out of the year before and this current year, the comp ratio would actually have remained even. And that is some follow-up analysis to the report this year. We have noted this in the report, but that's a little more detail to give you an idea of how you need to have some additional information sometimes to look at this data. Our aggregate ratios suggest that our faculty salaries are competitive relative to the market when we put this all together. Next slide, please. This slide shows the distribution of salaries relative to the market for employees that reside within the 13 families that have gone through the recent market refinement. And this project involves adding specialties within each family, allowing for formal benchmarking of salaries specifically, and our workforce to the external market. The overall average ratio for all employees in these refined families is 0.86, signaling that our salaries are on average 14% below market median. Ratios by job family range from 0.92 for advancement to roughly 0.8 for business development, marketing communications, animal health, and athletics. The refinement process involves significant market research, the construction of a rich internal database, thorough consultation with leaders, campus and department, human resources, and working managers, and pre-implementation training on compensation philosophy, principles, and practice for all supervision. This work has been completed with an approach that has involved minimal cost impact. The consistent outcome from the refinement project is that we see a reduction in the aggregate ratio for staff salaries. This does not mean that we have implemented actions that have caused reductions in our salaries. Rather, the ratios are impacted by our new and more accurate picture of what the external market is paying for our positions. Employers frequently make strategic decisions to pay below market median for some jobs and to match or lead the market for others. Employers can also decide to place greater value on other tangible and intangible benefits to balance what is offered for base salary. Next slide, please. Our office has also constructed a recent history of our merit pools to relevant markets through the analysis represented on this slide. Briefly, this compares the merit pool provided by Minnesota over the past 5 years as compared to the average provided by National Education, Minneapolis-St. Paul organizations, and all industries nationally. Our lower ratios are due in part as well to the cumulative gap in merit pools over this 5-year period as shown in the yellow box to the right. This picture does not yet include merit freeze for FY21. Next slide, please. So when we are faced with ratios and percentiles below the market, we need to ask ourselves, how does our benefit offering look, and how does that make us more competitive or not to the market from a total compensation perspective? Often the perception is that our benefits make up for a lower base salary. Total compensation includes pay and benefits both and can be assessed in a multitude of ways. To answer our question of whether our benefits make a difference in how we compare to the market, we need to assess our benefits from the value they provide to our employees. And today we'll look at our, as I said, our medical plan and our retirement plan as they represent the largest portions of benefit costs we provide to our employees. Next slide, please. Each of these bar charts show our salaries in maroon compared to the market. You will see the ratios that I outlined previously for each employee group. And so just using that to set the basis for this part of the discussion. Next slide, please. As we look at our comparison to the market, we look at core benefits provided by large employers. The university is comparable to the market in a percentage of total benefits spend on major areas of benefits expense. This comparison is necessary to remember as any future adjustments might be considered or suggested for a particular program, that we need to also consider the overall value of benefits and how that might be impacted. While we do not have a study that examines the fringe component for each employer, given there are benefits and comp components a university as a public employer does not provide, stock options, broad deferred payment programs, bonuses, it is safe to say that our total benefit spend is in fact comparable to the market we recruit and retain in. Next slide. Briefly, this is a list of the components that comprise our fringe rate at the university. And just to acknowledge what retirement and medical make up as components of this fringe rate overall, together they make up about 2/3 of the value of the fringe rate. Next slide, please. This is a comparison of our current employee health benefits against 27 large local private employers. And we see that this is based on benefit value. Our plan overall, based on the assumptions of the study, is second in this study. And if the average plan in the study is set at a value of 100, that would mean that our benefit value for our employees compared to broadly to the other plans is almost 20 points higher. This, however, is not the direct incremental value this difference would bring to the individual average employee compared to another plan and another employer might offer. The benefit values for this comparison are determined by applying a standard methodology to standard demographic profiles. And the 27 organizations in this study we compared to represent 70% of the Minnesota companies in the Fortune 500. Next slide, please. Using this information, we can analyze the approximate incremental value of our health plan. We would take the average annual cost of our own plan, as you see in the center of this chart. We would extrapolate it using the University of Minnesota employer provided value, and that would help us ascertain the difference in average annual value. That is a positive differentiator for the University of Minnesota plan. If we look at the average salary for P&A or civil service employees, this means that someone with that average salary would have an incremental difference to their current comp ratio of an additional 3.29%. Next slide, please. Similarly, we looked at the faculty retirement plan, and when we compare that to the local market, we find that the value provided from the university contribution represents an approximate 2.7% favorable difference to the large local private market. Next slide, please. However, when we look nationally at peer institutions and other for faculty and senior leaders, what we find is that there is not as significant of a difference in the retirement area. Our contributions are very similar to those in other institutions, and so we can't equate a positive difference that would incrementally affect their salary position to market. Next slide, please. So in summary, our medical plan and our retirement plan collectively do represent an incremental positive difference for staff, which takes that composite compa ratio and will raise it in combination of those two benefits approximately 6 points. There's almost no difference between the value provided through the medical plan or the retirement plan to other higher education peer institutions. Next slide, please. And this shows the incremental difference for civil service and P&A staff. We did not analyze the Minnesota State Retirement System pension plan that civil service uses as its base plan. That would probably mean a little lesser incremental difference for the compa ratio, as many public employers do use that same pension plan for their own employees. However, including the faculty retirement plan, this would take the 0.86 to a 0.92 market position. Next slide, please. The faculty, as we said, has almost no discernible difference. Our plans are competitive. Medical is slightly above, but not enough to add to this compa ratio. Next slide, please. Senior leader comparison, we look at the 50th percentile of the market as where we would want to be if we were right on market, and we do not see, again, any discernible difference for the medical or retirement plan in comparing what we have to our 34 AAU peer institutions. Next slide, please. There are limitations to this analysis. The compa ratios for each group are at a high level. The comparisons of benefits are necessarily broad in this type of assumption, and intricate aspects of the plans for health benefits and retirement aspects that are provided through a plan design are not known. And there are also the idea that Twin Cities employers we compete to have other comp and benefit programs not available in a public environment. Next slide, please. Comp and benefits are a foundational component of employee value proposition and work together with other important aspects of the package faculty and staff receive. Many that are at a high value as far as intangible benefits go are less easily quantified, but if present and accessible and used, lead to a much more engaged and high-performing organization. Next slide, please. The University of Minnesota does provide intangible benefits that, while difficult to quantify, are meaningful to our employees, and together with the tangible rewards, state a strong competitive case for the university. A compelling mission that translates into meaningful work is critical to many who work at the university. In leadership, talent, and development, individual assessments that we conduct, altruism is a high attribute for the average university employee. A collaborative environment and shared governance are likewise meaningful and provide a visible picture of the collaboration. Next slide, please. The next two slides show that while intangibles are not easily measured when we look at employee-generated ratings on public platforms such as Glassdoor, the university overall has a strong reputation. If you go to the next slide, we'll see how we compare as well to peer institutions. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, where do we go from here? That was a question I was asked when we completed these reports. I think the path forward involves effort on many fronts, including optimization and streamlining of our administrative work for any efficiencies that can be gained and a better way of working. We need to provide simple and clarifying language to our faculty and staff on the value of their total rewards they receive at the university. And we need to continue strong benefits stewardship that includes an understanding of market, what is possible for the university to provide in the future as certain benefit needs change priority, and what is valuable to the employee. A current example of total rewards impact could be the possibility and the question we have around what work will look like in the future. That could be a strong competitive advantage if managed appropriately. Focusing on all these aspects of the package an employee receives will be critical as the market for talent will start to move into a more competitive space post-pandemic. And the evolution of our data analytics internally will need to support this work. And with that, Chair McMillan and Regents, I pause for questions and discussion as you are available to have.
Thank you, Interim Vice President Horstman. There's a lot, that's an understatement, to chew on there for the board. And with that in mind, and with our time frame here and another very meaty topic ahead of us, budget drivers and considerations, I'm going to exercise my discretion and not open this up to the board for comment, knowing that this topic will be back in May and knowing that it feeds into our budget. But in doing that, I don't want anybody in your group, Ken, to think that this is a drive-by. One of the things we wanted more than anything as a board is better visibility into and more sophistication around these key measures and key drivers and key considerations in the biggest single factor we have at the university strategically, financially, or is our people. So I don't know if it's 72 or what number it is, but it's way up there in terms of where salaries and benefits rank on our, or fit in our total cost equation. So good stuff, work well done, knowing you've got more job family work to do, continue. But sorry, Regents, we're not going to have a conversation today or we won't get to our final couple of items here. So I'm going to turn to now to item 5, the budget framework, as we creep up on May and June in a biennial budget year and a legislative biennial conversation. This is critical. We're not going to talk about the budget itself today in terms of where we're going, but again, in the spirit of giving you the context you need to come into this conversation in May and June, this is critical stuff. So Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Tonneson, please jump in and please be quick, and maybe we'll have time for questions or we'll go right to the consent agenda at the tail end of this, but I want to set it up that way. And again, I apologize to the board and the administration that we don't have time to tackle this important topic on HR, but that doesn't mean we don't think it's important. So Senior VP Franz, are you leading?
I will start off. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I just want to make, I would just want to add 3 variables to this conversation as Vice President Tonneson walks through the slide deck, which is really an update from what you were given back in December to kind of set the context for the June budget discussion. I just want to mention 3 variables that we need to continue to watch. Number 1 is the February forecast that will come out at the end of February by MMB. Yesterday, MMB released its updated revenue projections, and through since the November forecast, we are now up in the state $459 million in revenues more than anticipated, or 3.5% more revenues than we thought we would have by this time, which is good news. And so that is a variable we need to take into account, and in the February forecast that will be released at the end of this month. The other thing that I want to mention, the other variable, is the COVID relief bill that is being considered by Congress. We don't know, obviously, what's going to be in there yet. It's another issue that will get resolved hopefully within the next month or so, and we'll see whether there's any additional or the same amount of relief for higher education. So we hope that's there. There may very well be some relief for states, which would also provide some comfort to us in terms of our budget requests to the state. And then the third variable I want to mention is the COVID recovery itself. Every week it seems to be like, yes, it's going really great, and then the next day it's not going so great. So, that's another part of what the difficulty that we're having in making these estimates about what are the right numbers and what they're going to be. So I just think that it's important for all of us to realize this is just another step as we set up the discussion for the June budget decisions that we're all going to have to make collectively. Literally, the numbers are changing every day. So with that easy task, I'll turn it over to Vice President Tonneson to walk through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Hello again. I'll talk quickly through some of this today, but I also want to make some points that I think are important for the conversation. So in the agenda, I'm going to talk very briefly about the budget framework, move on to the variables that we're going to talk about, and then how we can pull those variables together to create a plan for the budget, or several plans, as you will see. So let's go to the next slide right away. And you can just keep going until they're all there. There you go. I'm not sure when I last shared this slide with the board, or even if we have talked it through actually in the context of thinking about next year's budget. But I thought it might be a good visual to help emphasize that the budget we bring before you each year is an all funds budget. You have heard me talk before about the red, yellow, green concept of thinking about our funds. But just as a refresher, I want to focus for a minute on everything on this chart except the dark green. Because in budget development, all of the other categories, the red, yellow, and light green, are handled somewhat differently from the dark green. As a quick reminder, the funds included here in the red sections are those that hold restrictions placed on the use of the dollars by the source of the funds. The largest group here is the sponsored funds, but it also includes important sources such as gifts and endowment income, as well as our restricted state appropriations and federal appropriations. The yellow category includes the businesses of the institution that support their operations primarily through sales to individuals. The goal here is they earn enough to support their operations and contribute toward overhead costs, and therefore they are kind of having neutral impact in the budget balancing game, so to speak. And then the light green category in the upper left here are the unrestricted funds at the unit level, hence the green, but they generally stay in the units that generate them and are not spread across the university. For most of these other sources, so outside of the dark green that we've been talking about, there are a few direct decisions that are needed at the institutional level to move forward. Each unit involved in those activities is required to balance the budget for them, to estimate and influence revenues and manage the associated costs. We monitor those other fund activities and we leverage them where possible to help out the rest of the budget. But the interactions are on the margin. The bulk of our budget discussion with you remains on the large discretionary fund category made up of the state O&M appropriation and tuition, which are depicted here in the dark green. These are the funds that hold real-time opportunities shaped by leadership decisions that can impact all our mission activities and allow us to adequately address the support and the infrastructure needs as well. So moving on to the next slide. This shows the all funds budget that you approved for the current year. The major revenue sources are identified at the top with what we call the framework funds, the O&M appropriation and tuition highlighted in yellow. The 59% of the revenues are those represented on the previous slide in the light green, the yellow, and the red categories. And the breakdown of that 59% is on the far right of this slide. I will just mention that the expenditure plan for the non-sponsored funds is included in this slide because I wanted to show you where the all funds budget actually comes together in what you approve. The non-sponsored column here is an actual attachment approved as part of the FY21 budget. The sponsored funds are not included in that same attachment because most of those grants are budgeted on a multi-year basis rather than a fiscal year basis. But we do provide the estimated total grant amount to be spent in the fiscal year, which for this year is the $600 million shown here over on the right. So keeping that 59% of the revenue and all the opportunities and challenges within that 59% in mind as we go along, we shift a lot of our attention to the decisions we need to make on the 41% to bring the balanced budget recommendation before you in June. That is the budget framework. And the math is really pretty simple. We've talked about this before. Our general framework each year involves aligning the incremental changes in available resources to be equal to or less than the incremental changes in costs and planned investments. But the devil is in the details, so to speak. So moving on to the next slide. We engage in an iterative process of asking and answering questions about what to plan as the incremental changes for each major resource and each major expenditure category, the types of questions that are outlined here. So what's the likelihood of receiving our requested state appropriation versus something less than we requested? What are our goals for tuition, for reallocation, for compensation, and so forth? The first or second time through in answering these questions generally leaves us with an imbalanced budget. So we have to go back and make adjustments until the final plans balance the budget in a way that addresses the university's goals in the best ways possible. So given that task before us, what basic information do we know today that helps us build the estimates necessary to pull it all together for next year? Next slide. And we're going to start with the expenditures and the planning around expenditures. The first bucket of costs we must consider in balancing the budget contains those items that allow us to maintain the core of our existing activities, to keep the place running. And the largest cost we have here, which we just spent the last half hour or so discussing, are the salary and fringe benefit costs of our faculty and staff. And right off the bat, I have to share the very real information that actual fact that information changes almost daily. So earlier in our budget planning process, we believed we would see a small increase in fringe benefit rates for graduate students, which even without a salary increase would have led to the small $1.8 million in costs you see here for next year. We know now that's not going to happen. The fringe rates will not increase, so we can take that one off the table. So just disregard that first row. If we decide, however, to provide salary increases, an increase in the planned general salary pool averaged across all employees at 1% would cost us an additional $12.5 million in incremental in the framework funds and an additional $11.5 million in all other funds. Beyond that, without making choices to enhance or expand core activities, we face required facilities and technology cost increases. And the cost estimates here are current. The facilities piece is driven by increases in utility costs, the most significant being for electricity, but also for debt service and operations for new buildings, including the Health Science Education Center and the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain, which are coming online and have come online recently. The technology licensing and maintenance cost is related to our vendor agreements and charges for our enterprise and library systems. Finally, in maintaining the core specifically for FY22, and this is new, we have the added complication of lingering impacts of the pandemic. Throughout March, we will be updating the estimates we shared with you in December on the projected financial shortfalls across all of our units from reduced enrollments and reduced activity generally. But we will also be attempting to project how much of the revenue drop in particular will continue into FY22 and in some cases beyond that. Just looking at tuition, even if the freshman class returns to the higher pre-COVID levels this fall, we will have to adjust to that smaller cohort from this year making its way through over the next 3 or 4 years. So we need to plan for that impact by making recurring decisions, which up to this point we haven't done. The $20 million you see here is a placeholder for that analysis, but I think it is a reasonable amount at this point. I hope I'm being over conservative here, but we will see. Slide, please. Finally, on the cost side, an important budget variable for any university is what it plans for advancing on the work of the institution to the next level in terms of quality, impact, service, and so on. If we could plan for an investment pool over and above the costs I just mentioned in the $10 to $20 million range, we would be able to address the high priority items in this bucket. In years of more limited resource gains, It is only the most critical needs and opportunities that can be accommodated in the budget. The availability of new state appropriations and decisions made about tuition rate increases and or higher reallocation expectations directly impacts the level of new spending in this category. Of course, this is also where increased availability of other funding sources outside of the state appropriation and tuition can provide that edge of excellence and opportunity. And we look for that throughout the process every year. So moving on to revenues, then on the next slide, into what the revenue picture might look like for the next year. You can advance one more, please. We are in the middle of the state process for determining our appropriation for the next year. And so far, so good. You've heard that the governor recently announced that he recommended full funding of our request in his recommended budget. And as Myron mentioned, we're going to be watching what happens with the February forecast and the targets that are given to the committees later in the process to determine what we want to estimate in our process for what might happen to our budget. But if we get what we requested, it would provide an incremental new $15.5 million added to our base. As you recall, that request was for core budget support. And within that, we indicated we would launch several initiatives contemplated in the strategic plan that would have particular appeal and benefit to the state in the areas of healthcare, sustainability, and natural resources and agro-food systems. So we will be watching, as I said, what happens in the process. We will work with the legislature as best we can to make our case, and we'll see where that ends up. It's possible that we will not know our appropriation for sure at the time the budget needs to be finalized for review in June. So if that is the case, we may be bringing some contingency plans along with our recommended budget. Moving on to tuition on the next slide. Based on our recent experience with students and families around the pandemic and the very real need to be responsive to their financial challenges, the university has some modest goals related to changes in tuition rates. For resident undergraduate tuition rates, we have worked to hold the rate increases at or below the rates of inflation, and we showed you that earlier this morning. That was particularly relevant, as we show, for the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses. As you are aware, our strategy for the Twin Cities non-resident non-reciprocity rate has differed from that for the resident rate. We have been increasing this rate significantly for incoming freshmen while holding the rate increases for continuing students to no more than 5.5% each year. This strategy moved the rate to the middle. We were 8 out of 14 of the Big Ten group prior to this year, but while we held our rates flat for the current year, the 2 schools with rates just under ours did not follow that same path. They implemented rate increases this year, and so that has moved us back to 10th out of 14 in that comparison group. Given the move for more students to want to enroll closer to home, recruiting in this space has remained challenging for next fall's class. Finally, the goal for graduate and professional rates has generally been to hold increases to around the rate of inflation, with variations driven by market considerations, student debt load, program rankings, and so forth, depending on the program. And of course, you know, the pandemic led to a 0% increase in all tuition and fees for the current year. Added all together, assuming stable enrollment, a 1% increase across all rates is estimated to generate about $9.5 million. The question we face, what should we plan for each of these rate categories for next year? Then finally, moving to the next slide, on the resource side, we need to decide how much reallocation is necessary and appropriate for the FY22 budget. Reallocation is our internal practice of finding efficiencies or purposely reducing or eliminating expenditures on a recurring basis in order to reinvest existing resources in new things. As I cautioned in December, it isn't technically a reallocation if the permanent reduction is necessary to offset a revenue loss, either tuition or state appropriation reductions. In that scenario, we would be in the position of implementing really large expense reductions for 2 purposes, in part to offset the loss of revenue, but also in part as a reallocation to cover other cost increases or higher priority investments, which unfortunately don't go away when the revenues do drop or if the revenues do drop. In each of the last 7 years, we have reallocated 1 to 2% of total unit allocations on a recurring basis. So that does not include the one-time spending reductions implemented to address the pandemic shortfalls last year and this year. The magnitude of recurring reallocations has not been implemented across the board, and I don't anticipate we would do that. The goal here continues to be to find or create opportunities to gain efficiencies, lower costs, or slow them down, and to do so while maintaining quality across the board. Moving forward, we have to choose how deep to push the budget reductions for FY22. Preliminarily, we have instructed units to provide plans for up to a 9% reduction in their base, state, and tuition funds due to the uncertainties we face as a result of the pandemic. And as we move through the process, we will refine those targets. So on this slide, this is the first step in pulling it all together. We really wanted to show you two things: the primary variables we need to make decisions about, all on this slide, and then on the next one, some examples, some hypothetical examples or budget frameworks to demonstrate how those decisions can lead to a plan. So first, the variables here. These are the primary variables to consider for next year: the resources on the left and the costs on the right. Again, this is focused on the framework funds of state appropriation and tuition. There is very little that we know or that is definite at this point. It does appear the minimum cost increase for facilities and technology, totaling about $7.5 million in the lower right quadrant of the chart, is the only definite number on this slide. The others are estimates attached to different assumptions and are made in a way that allows you to scale up or down as you want to think about it on your own. The table identifies here, for example, what each 1% or 1.5% tuition rate increase generates in all the different categories, and it shows a range of potential state appropriation changes with our requested increase assumed to be the maximum possible. It also shows the resource yield from different levels of internal reallocation and budget cutting that we have asked our units to begin planning around. On the right side, we have identified the cost and framework funds for two very modest plans to increase salaries at 1% or 1.5%. And then on the bottom, different possible levels of support for categories of spending that are included in the budget beyond compensation. How much is addressed at a minimum level versus levels that make it possible to invest and advance in these areas is obviously dependent on resources and priorities. Now, for the hypothetical scenarios on the next slide, we have displayed three different example frameworks using information from that previous table. Please note that what we actually end up with will not be any one of these three exactly as you see them here. I'm sorry, go back. There we go. Sorry, that's the slide I'm on. They're meant to show you and make evident in some very real ways that making decisions related to one row has a direct impact on the other rows, and that what happens with the incremental state appropriation on row 5 can have a significant impact on decisions we have to make for the other variables. You can see that in all three examples here, there are certain cost items that remain roughly the same, lines 18 to 20. But you can also see that the ability to provide a salary increase and to provide programmatic investments changes considerably across the scenarios. In the biennial request column with the green header, the availability of that increased appropriation combined with tuition and reallocation levels slightly higher than what we've been doing recently could allow for a salary increase and a healthy, but perhaps not exorbitant amount of programmatic investment. In a second scenario with a stable state appropriation and very low tuition increase, the gold column, we could provide even up to a 2% salary increase, but that comes only with a significant recurring reallocation and the loss of investment dollars compared to the first column. And then finally, with an appropriation reduction, even with a tuition increase over the current rate of inflation and an even higher reallocation, we could not afford a salary increase. As I'm sure you can tell, if you're working your way through this in your own heads, kind of as I'm talking here, there are very many combinations we could model, and we have. The picture at this 30,000 foot level is a guide that can provide a starting point for the planning process. We're halfway through our task of meeting with all the units across the university to determine what their challenges and opportunities are. And as we talked about in December, we will learn a lot through that process that allows us to continually refine these variables. Next slide, please. Because our goal is to get down to the final version that the president wants to recommend to you for approval. It is that process of gaining an understanding of unit level budgets combined with the goals of the institution and the strategic plan, and in the context of what happens with our state appropriation, that helps us make decisions on the variables and arrive at a balanced version. This is a tweak and repeat kind of process, going back to the overarching questions I mentioned earlier until the package is balanced and delivers the best budget possible given the constraints that we face. As mentioned in your docket materials, a successful budget at the end of this process is one that reflects the priorities of the university leadership, makes each unit as successful as possible given our resource constraints, and is responsible and balanced. And your thoughts and input throughout the process is part of our tweak and repeat cycle. It helps us to shape the answers to the variable questions. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I apologize for talking fast, but we welcome your input.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Tonneson, for being as quick as you can with material as thick and important as that. So is thick a complimentary word for data and analysis? I don't know. But anyway, that's my word this morning. So I've got a few regents ready to go. I'm going to target 12:45, no later than 12:50 to end this meeting. We're supposed to end at 12:30, but we got a couple agenda items yet to go, and there's action items built into those. So I'm going to ask regents that want to talk now. I don't know that it's valuable to share your opinion right now. If you've got questions, please ask those, but be succinct, knowing that as I start, I've got at least 3 speakers and not much time. So I'm going to go to Regent Anderson first. We have not heard from Regent Anderson this morning, so please.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of knowing, I did have my hand up for Mr. Horstman, but I was not called.
I cut you off. Yes. Yep.
But my question is the same. I'm just going to ask it of Mr. Franz or Ms. Tonneson. We had retirement opportunity for people to retire early with some benefits, and we knew that program would cost us up front, but save money down the road as we look to rehires, and as Mr. Horstman said, the shifting employee duties at the university in the post-COVID world. We don't know all who's being hired, and we're going to be judicious about the hiring of those 700 employees if and when we do that. My question is there any savings in this budget yet from that program? Or is it costs because of some of the inducements we gave them for early retirement?
Who wants to tackle that?
I think Vice President Tonneson wants to tackle that.
I can do that. Mr. Chair, Regent Anderson, yes, there will be savings, recurring savings in the budget. And I'm going to say starting in FY22. So in the year that we're entering, that we're developing the budget for, we will have recurring savings. That will be part of the way that that'll be part of our budget cutting reallocation part of the budget. Yes.
Okay. Is it reflected in these scenarios?
Mr. Chair, Regent Anderson, it's reflected only in that row that says reallocations, depending on if we do it. That's where it will be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. I know that your colleague, Regent Rocha, also had his hand up at the close of the last item, and I cut both of you off. So I'll go to Regent Rocha next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be fairly quick. Regarding the previous presentation, I'll send some via email. I'll ask a couple questions that I was going to ask and see if I can't derive some of that information before we have our retreat dialogue. As it relates to this, I'm just going to weigh in real quick. I think that, first of all, our tuition, we are approaching 50% higher than our neighboring comprehensive public research universities, the neighboring states. I just don't see that there's any capacity for us to meet mission and have a tuition increase at this point for resident students. With respect to non-resident students, which of course, as we know, the vast majority don't even submit a FAFSA with respect to the university, I think that we do have to stay to that commitment. And in large part because, again, people, for an institution like the Twin Cities, they tend to see that non-resident rate as being the sticker prices, the value, the value of the degree that we're offering. And I think that we should retain that. So just wanted to weigh in on those two components, that resident tuition, I don't see any basis for us to be making an increase. Obviously, if we had the capacity for a decrease to become, again, more accessible to a wider range of people, even if it's just visually, but I think it's actually substantially, and then also put us into better competition with our neighboring institutions. I think that's where we've got to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Roche. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just a quick one. Julie, you talk about there's state funding tuition, and kind of our efficiency work as sources of funds. How should we think about philanthropy? It's a big number, and how do you think about that as we model the sources of revenue? I know it's volatile and it's tricky, but it's also there, and it's well over $200 million. Of our budget now. So maybe just a few quick comments on how to think about that.
Sure. Chair McMillan, Regent Powell, it comes in that other funds category, and it varies by unit. And so if there are opportunities, if a college is getting additional donations, and let's say the endowment payout is growing as a result of that they can then use those funds to fund faculty, then we factor that in as an other revenue that comes into this equation by taking pressure off of the O&M and tuition part of the budget. This whole exercise is about recurring changes, so permanent based kind of changes that you can count on every year. So if there is a donation that is a one-time thing, it's really not going to come into play in this balancing of the budget exercise. We talk about it and understand how it will help the unit in terms of their budget goals, but it doesn't balance the budget. It has to be a recurring change. And so if that is happening, if there is a growth in the available donated funds to support their operating budget, then it says to them, we can either cut less, takes the place of cuts, or it adds that extra investment opportunity for that particular school. And then it does come into play, it has a role in balancing the budget. So it varies by unit, it varies by year, but we absolutely pay attention to that and try to bring it in to help out the overall budget whenever we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. Regent Hsu, and then I've got our student representative, Tojo Garcia, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. This presentation just keeps getting better every year. I think I might have missed something because you were talking so fast. The question that I had coming into this was the repayment of the loans that we talked about in December. I'm not sure if the loan number went up or down. I think it was 82 million at the time. Where does the repayment of those loans come from?
Vice President Tonneson.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu. So we will be re-estimating the current year shortfall in the March time period. And so we will, for the units that we're contemplating loans for, we're going to re-estimate what their shortfalls are. We also are going to include and pull in the impact of the new federal money that we're getting just across all of our plans to see how that will impact. And we will end up with a new estimate for loans. The repayment of those loans starting in FY22, depending on how much they are and where they are, would either be perhaps through increased housing and dining rates, if it's in auxiliaries, or in the case of athletics, we have to re-estimate all of their external revenue sources to see if that's growing and if they have to cut costs to help pay back the loan. So it just kind of depends on what the total dollar amount is that we're going to have to loan and for which unit in terms of how it shows up in next year's budget. But it isn't going to be used to sort of balance the overall, funding compensation, funding facilities and those kinds of things. It's kind of an on the side calculation for those units.
Thank you.
Did you?
That's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Representative Tojo Garcia.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, presenters. A very informative part of the docket. Thank you. I think my comment that I'd like to make would just be to sort of caution against the raising of tuition in the coming months and for the next year for students. I'm sure I don't have to inform any of you that the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a massive loss of income, particularly focused on marginalized communities and on young people in the United States. In fact, a cursory look at some studies that have been released during the pandemic reveals that some of the main predictors of whether a family has lost income are precisely race and, in addition to that, whether or not they have children, which goes to the number of women, in addition, who have dropped out of the workforce because of this. Raising tuition for students at the University of Minnesota moving forward in light of the economic conditions is not a good idea. It would likely lead to more students abandoning their education, and we know that for many of those students is an education that was funded with loans that they will still have to pay back. So I would just caution against that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tojo Garcia. All right, that brings us to, and thank you, Vice President Tonneson, for a great walkthrough, and Regent Shu's compliment, I think, is reflective of where many of us are, especially those of us that have been around this process for a long time. It is informative, helpful, and very constructive as we head into the May-June timeframe. So the consent report, which was revised, and you've all got it. You got additional materials from President Gabel early in the week, and if anyone's interested in asking a question, making a comment, or to have anything separated out, please let me, or using the raised hand feature, or Mr. Langworthy know that. Given the incredibly strategic, important nature of the agreement with Google, I'm going to have that item considered separately. And I'd like to turn now to President Gabel to give us her thoughts on that and to frame that in the strategic and consequential way that I, at least this region, sees it. And I'd like her to talk to us a little bit about that. When we're done with that, we'll take questions if there are any. Then we'll have a roll call vote on that. And then I would ask Senior Vice President Franz to walk through the rest of the items, and we'll take anything out that we need to after that. But at this point, we're only acting on the first item, or we're not acting on anything yet after President Gabel walks us through it quickly. Then we'll take a motion and a second and discuss. President Gabel.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Vice Chair Beeson, and members of the committee. Amidst a pretty robust discussion of challenges, I'm very excited to share with you something that has us so excited and optimistic about the future, an innovative program that we've developed that's really poised to transform higher education in the post-pandemic world here in the state of Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota, and beyond. I'll give just a little bit of framework that our Impact 2025 strategic plan has goals around many things that are going to be relevant to the discussion we're about to have. Distributed and online learning, advances in health sciences education, opportunities to lower cost, opportunities for students to work while they're in school, and others. We've really leaned into those strategic goals. While we've been working on the strategic plan and the metrics, we certainly didn't wait around to see what might happen as the strategic plan unfolded. And as you might imagine, during these very interesting times that we've been in through the course of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and the way we've leveraged technology, we've also had the silver lining of seeing some opportunities, ways in which these difficult times are intersecting with these strategic goals and give us ways to be distinctive, ways to really serve, and ways to look to the next chapter of the institution and the way it serves the state and beyond. So in that spirit, and building upon the tremendous success of our Rochester campus in its graduation rates, its equitable attainment and outcomes, its job placement rates, building upon our deep partnership with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester with undergraduate education in other ways. I'm very pleased to introduce NextGen Med. So NextGen Med is an innovative, accelerated, year-round undergraduate health sciences degree. It's set to launch with its academic start in the summer of 2022, although we will have a soft launch for rising seniors in the form of summer camp in the summer of 2021. It's a future-focused program. It's designed to prepare graduates with industry-identified competencies in a wide variety of high-tech health careers. Students will progress through the program with both in-person and virtual learning, and they will use newly developed cutting-edge technology to accelerate that progress and process. This will cut their costs and will allow us to also document and track the way in which they learn in a new digital portfolio. They will have access to mentors and other real-world applied experiences and health challenges through our partnership at the Mayo Clinic. So this cutting-edge technology that we're referring to is powered by Google. It's offering a first-of-its-kind partnership then between the University of Minnesota, Google, and the Mayo Clinic. And so my remarks for you today are sort of broken into two categories. One is to make you aware of the program as a whole, which I've just done. That portion is really for informational purposes, although I'm obviously happy to discuss it. But then to bring before you the part that requires board approval, which is the contract with Google to acquire this new technology. And we seek approval of that contract today. So members of the committee, Google and their affiliates are poised to create a one-of-a-kind digital learning platform, the design of which has occurred in partnership with us and with the Mayo Clinic. And this technology is specifically possible because of the talents of Google engineers and their thinkers, their existing partnership with Mayo, and their presence in Rochester. We would be acquiring this technology for this program, but it would be ours. So things we could do in the future would be ours to discern. They have a particular type of tech expertise that we don't currently have, despite the incredible competency of our instructional designers who have obviously stepped up to the plate remarkably over this past year. Because this program has a new digital architecture, and so it would work in concert with what we already use in terms of partnerships and tools, Canvas, and other things that are in place. The cost of this contract with Google will be paid using a combination of balances, external support, a portion of state funds designated for enhancing health education, and central reserves. But specific plans would be detailed in the recommended operating budget for the relevant fiscal years, which would start in fiscal year 2022 and beyond, using the methodology that Julie Tomlinson just provided to you. The pilot academic program using the platform is expected to be financially self-sustaining after its launch. The initial investment in the platform, though, is significant, and that's why we wanted to call it to your attention. But we also want to call to your attention the potential for unbelievable return. So first, there's the obvious potential for return from increased revenue due to enrollment in the program after the pilot cohort, ultimately contributing to the growth of the Rochester campus. After initial pilot cohorts of 50 students, financial modeling projections based on enrollment increases of up to 1,000 students indicate tuition revenue increases of up to $6 million. So the program very quickly becomes revenue positive. Secondly, the pilot will be assessed and will be determined how it can provide a mechanism for other university programs to tailor their distributed learning approaches in ways appropriate for their student populations, their industry partnerships, their applied experiences, et cetera. And finally, the forward-looking investment of this type holds the potential in a more qualitative way to contribute to the university's reputation as a higher education innovation leader, emerging from these disruptive times, this historic period, with a world-class, unique idea. Upon approval of the contract, if the board chooses to do so, faculty innovators will begin to integrate the existing coursework using the requirements of our current BS in Health Sciences on the Rochester campus, with the oversight, mentorship, and applied experiential opportunities being offered by the Mayo Clinic. The specifics of this academic program would be ready to advertise for recruitment that begins in August of 2021, with the actual academic program being for summer of 2022, with a summer camp offered in between. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my remarks and stand ready along with Chancellor Carroll, who has been the driver, as you all can imagine, in her excellent creativity to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, President Gabel, and thank you, Chancellor Carroll, and obviously a host of other people for bringing forward something that I don't think we can possibly overstate the innovative and incredibly extraordinary, opportunistic thing you've seized on here in a partnership with a couple cutting-edge entities themselves in Mayo and Google. So I'm very interested, very supportive, but I would look to the board and see, or the committee, and see if I have a motion to approve the contract with Google LLC that's in your materials.
Move to
I'll move it.
approve.
All right, there was enough moves there to consider a second too.
Second.
That's before us for discussion then. And Regent Hsu, I see your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I had asked a couple questions a few days ago about the Central Reserve's approval for this. I didn't get a clear answer, or at least I didn't understand the answer. Are we approving, Central Reserves, the policy states that if it's over $250,000, that an approval has to be made by the board. This is a bundled funding scheme where Central Reserves may or may not be used depending on how much is available through the other means mentioned. And so my question is, are we approving a future Central Reserves appropriation, or are we going to come back and get that Central Reserves approved at a later date? Does that make sense?
It does, Regent Hsu, and I would ask, is this Vice President Tonneson or perhaps Mr. Volna to jump in here? I think that you're correct. They're looking at a number of different resources, and as President Gabel just mentioned, hopefully a sharp uptick in revenues going forward, but we need to get it launched. So as to the technical question of whether we need a Central Reserves approval as well, who in the administration can speak to that?
Mr. Chair, Madam President, if you like, I can speak to this one. Okay, Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, there are two ways that Central Reserves allocations get approved by the board. One is through the $250,000 provision you mentioned. That's part of the general contingency report that comes to the board every month. The second way is when we put into the annual operating budget that we recommend to you in June, we list all of the Central Reserves resources and the proposed allocations directly from Central Reserves. That's a second way. What I anticipate is, depending on, for this contract, when the bills are due, if there's a Central Reserves recommendation from us, you would get it as part of that budget proposal in the year that it's relevant. So it would be FY22 or 23, whichever year we have to make the payment, we would include it in that piece. We may not choose to recommend the use of Central Reserves, but if we do, that's how I see it coming through.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. That was my understanding as well, is that we won't go to Central Reserves till we have to. But Regent Hsu, does that answer it? We can come back and approve a Central Reserve should administration tell us that's what they want to do to pay for some of this?
Yes, that's fine with me. I just needed clarification on that. Thank you.
Very good. Good question. All right, I've got two regents, and again, mindful of the fact that we have another committee starting in just over an hour. Regent Powell.
A quick one, Chair McMillan. Thank you. Chancellor Carroll, congratulations on developing such a terrific program. Is the way to think about this as, really building on the program that you've already developed over several years and really expanding, using Google and online capability to expand the reach, or are you going to be adding other programmatic elements? Just trying to get a feel for the scope of this.
Chancellor Carroll.
Chair McMillan and Regent Powell, I Regent Powell, you are spot on that we are going to build on the innovations that we have discerned fuel student success in our current delivery of the Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences. And then with Google, we'll be able to explore how a higher tech platform can further enhance, especially in the area of equity. And the programmatic elements that we may be able to explore in addition to higher tech include some other innovations that our faculty have discerned over the years, and they connect directly to our industry partner in health sciences, the kinds of experiences, entrepreneurial and global, that can get our students future ready in a post-pandemic world. So I think the answer is all of the above.
Okay, thanks, Lori. This is terrific.
Very good. Let's see, Regent Beeson, and then I've got Anderson, and then I'm going to have Mr. Langworthy call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, President Gable and Chancellor and all the folks that have worked on this. Is really a terrific undertaking, and all the more impressive by the fact that it's happening while we're dealing with all these other issues and distractions and responsibilities. I was going to ask the sort of building on the chair's question about scoping, Chancellor, not holding you to sort of enrollment numbers, but where do you think you'll start? Sort of what's your expectations for what this could lead to in terms of new students enrolled? Do you have any sense of that? What do you think you might be using in that budget going forward? Or is it just too early to put a number down?
Chancellor Carroll.
Chair McMillan and Regent Beeson, thank you for that question. We have an overall strategic plan for our enrollment growth, and I know that I'll be having the opportunity to talk about how our strategic plan melts with the system strategic plan in a coming board meeting. I look forward to that. It's really important that we pilot this thoroughly with our initial cohort and that we learn from that. The lessons are going to be really important in terms of informing the scaling. And the scaling for the campus has been set out in that strategic plan. This holds more potential as we use our degree to pilot a platform that could be used elsewhere. And so I would like to postpone speculating about the potential for enrollment growth until we have further information. But the platform itself is certainly not limited in the number of students that it can serve.
Thank you, Chancellor Carroll, and probably best not to speculate, but we can all be expectational in this. And very well so. Regent Anderson.
I'll be very brief. I just going through this, I know this kind of came to us late for action, and I will just tell you that as a board member, we've been very well served at the University of Minnesota when we've listened to our chancellors from Rochester on some of their ideas, going back to Chancellor Lemkuhl and now Chancellor Carroll. They're a little bit unorthodox sometimes, a little bit creative, and a little bit innovative, like having the main campus in a shopping mall. But I think we have learned to trust that the people in Rochester vet the work and do the job necessary. So I'll give my wholehearted approval, and I hope you're turning out students with Google like crazy. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Anderson. Well said. All right, Mr. Langworthy, would you proceed to call the roll on the approval of the contract with Google LLC?
Chair McMillan, on the agreement, Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes. Chair McMillan, there are 12 yes votes, 0 no votes.
Very good. Thank you. That approval of by the committee approval of the agreement with Google carries by a 12-0 vote. And then with the expectation that our partners, our valued partners here are watching, just to thank you on behalf of the Board of Regents for putting us in a position at the University of Minnesota to have a conversation like this. Thank you to Mayo and Google. Now, Senior Vice President Franz, can you walk us through the rest of the items on the consent agenda? And then I'll ask if anyone wants to separate anything out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I will. There are 3 categories. The first category is the Central Reserves General Account. But in this particular case, there are no items over $250,000 requiring approval. There are a couple of items over that amount, but those were approved in the operating budget, as Vice President Tonneson mentioned just a few moments ago. The other category are goods and services for over $1 million or more. We had 6 contracts listed. We've already approved number 6, Google, and there are 5 more contracts there for approval that are typically you'll see on the consent calendar. And the last area, number 3, is the employment agreement with Dr. Calvin Phillips as Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. The background information is there and the contract is there for approval. That's what's on the consent calendar for today, Mr. Chair.
Very good. If anybody wants to have anything considered separately, please let us know now. I'll take a moment to pause. Mr. Langworthy, any Regent Rocha?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quickly, I want to ask to have it pulled out. I just want to make a comment on welcoming the new Vice President for Student Affairs. As my colleagues know, I'm particularly sensitive to the rates for our senior administration and the impact that it has up and downstream for our costs for our students and for the state of Minnesota. While I note that this is below what has been represented as the midpoint for that position, it's still a substantial amount, and I still think it's a place that we can continue to make progress. But I plan to support this appointment and welcome our new vice president, but wanted to at least be on the record as noting my continued concern that we have to be very cautious as we make these decisions. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Langworthy, any other requests?
Not that I see, Chair McMillan.
All right, then is there a motion from the committee to approve the consent agenda, the remaining items on the consent agenda?
Move it.
Second.
Very good. Moved and seconded. Discussion on anything else? Hearing and looking at my hands list, seeing none, I'll ask Mr. Langworthy to once again read the roll or call the roll.
On the remaining items in the revised consent report, Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes. Chair McMillan, there are 12 yes votes and 0 no votes.
Very good. Thank you. The consent agenda, the remaining items on the consent agenda are approved unanimously by this committee and will go to the full board for final action tomorrow. And I'm going to note, without asking Senior Vice President Franz to highlight the information items in your materials, you can contact Senior Vice President Franz if you have questions. There's no approval there for us. I don't like to move that quickly through important stuff, but we need to today. We stand adjourned as a committee, and we reconvene at 2 o'clock with Regent Anderson's committee.
Thank you.